If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 301, Elon. Meanwhile, in Japan and the USA, the Kishan latest video game, Quake, and Civilization were released for quite a while. Although many Japanese were also quite thrilled to play the latest PC video games of Kishan, it is not as enthusiastic as in the USA. In the USA, around 10 to 15% of American households owned a computer, and it was about 26 to 39 million or so households. It can be seen that it even surpassed the owned video game consoles by households in the USA, as currently, SKES over the years was owned by 20 to 25 million households, and the KS1 that was owned by about 10 to 15 million households. KS1 sales in just a year were quite outstanding. Even the other companies who estimated KS1 sales were astonished, though they knew that Kishan was actually losing quite a bit of money by selling KS1 at such a low price. Kishan gained gradual profits with video games, and with the fact that most video game companies in Japan and the USA were using VG Engine, the royalty fees received by Kishan alone were already enough to fill Kishan's belly. Although many companies using VG Engine didn't mind using Kishan software because of its usefulness, some companies were planning to build similar software as Kishan, but most of them found out that it was too time-consuming. Just by agreeing to the terms and conditions of Kishan to use their advanced VG software was much more practical and realistic. Although the licensing options for Kishan were quite limited, allowing only well-established companies to afford its use, it was still a reasonable deal since Kishan supported them to increase sales and contribute to the growth of the video game library for the consoles. Elon recently founded a company named Zip2 with his brother and friends. It's a city guide software company where they work tirelessly in a small rented office in Palo Alto, with Elon personally coding the website. At the age of 24, he saw the potential of the internet to revolutionize the world and decided to pursue it wholeheartedly. Despite having the entrepreneurial spirit, he still had a hobby playing video games. Having developed a video game and sold it at old arcades when he was young, this small achievement influenced his current entrepreneurial spirit, and right now, he also saw the potential of the internet and websites. He even dropped out of college to pursue the boundless potential of the web. And also, the fact that a young man just a year older than him, the Japanese Shinro Suzuki, was featured in magazines, especially in Forbes. In some magazine information, Shinro Suzuki seemed to be investing a lot of money towards internet development with the acquisition of WorldCom, and the Kishan Foundation was spreading awareness of the internet. Elon knew that he was not the only one who could see the boundless potential of the internet and the wealth they could make. Elon had a bit of admiration towards Shinro, especially considering Shinro's achievement as the youngest billionaire according to Fortune's data statistics. However, Elon was not impatient to reach the top. In fact, he had already planned to donate 1 million to some charity if he became a millionaire, whenever that might happen. Elon trusted the process. Currently, the Zip2 company had just been founded on November 6, and it would probably take a while before he became a millionaire. Elon, at this moment, was heading towards a video game store. Why would he want to go to such a store? To buy video games, of course, but wouldn't it be a waste of time? Well, Elon has invested a significant amount of time laying the foundation for his future. Playing video games is his hobby, and during his free time, he spends some moments immersed in The Legend of Zelda and the leveling video game Pokemon on his Game Boy. Currently, he is on his way to GameStop, a video game distributor in partnership with other distributors. Elon intends to buy the latest video games like Quake and Civilization I. The Quake video game has been a topic of discussion on the Kishan website forum. It's said to be the 3D first-person shooter that will bring an end to the domination of the Doom series in the FPS genre. The Doom FPS genre truly reigns supreme, and when 2.5D or 3D graphics are mentioned in PC video games, the first thing that comes to mind is Doom. It's even exaggerated to the point that many gamers refer to other 2.5D PC video games as Doom clones or something similar. But with the advent of the PC video game Quake, the dominance of the Doom video game among many gamers in the USA diminished, as the graphics and gameplay of Quake were superior overall. Upon Elon's arrival at the GameStop store, he promptly headed to the PC video games section and purchased Quake, Civilization, and Monopoly. Leaving the store with a faint smile, Elon thought, with this, I can calm the demons in my mind. Indeed, though Elon was just starting by founding the Zip2 company with a demanding workload, he gradually accumulated mental stress and pressure. Playing video games became a means for him to escape this mental stress and find temporary relief from the demons in his mind. And those demons were anxiety and doubts, whether dropping out of college to pursue his goal and explore the potential of the internet was the right decision or not. Civilization seems like a fun game to play. Elon muttered as he gazed at the CD cover of Civilization I. Elon had read about this video game in a video game magazine before. Even before the release of Civilization I and with just its announcement, there were reports that even Will Gates became a bit addicted to the game. Of course, Elon knew that the report could have been exaggerated, but since the news sources were from Kishan Power magazine itself, the report might have been reliable at some point, given Kishan's current alliance with Microsoft. Perhaps due to Kishan Power's claims, the video game Civilization I attracted some people who admired Will Gates to buy and play the game for themselves. Chapter 302, Explanation. The claims of Kishan Power magazine, stating that Will Gates became a bit addicted to the video game Civilization I, even attracted the attention of media outlets, leading to several media outlets reporting Kishan Power's claims and even wanting to interview Will Gates themselves. However, the Microsoft CEO has no interest in answering the media outlets' inquiries. In the Microsoft headquarters, in the CEO's office, Will Gates has just been quite annoyed with Kishan for reporting his fascination with playing the video game Civilization I. And now, almost everyone in the company thinks he is becoming a video game addict, being complacent, and not handling the company as much anymore. Some investors with representative directors and voting power on the board are even calling to confirm the news, and a board meeting took place, although it's not a meeting time yet. After some explaining and with Paul Allen, Will Gates' friends' support, they were able to clarify that Kishan's claims were just to attract people to their video games, and that it's just a marketing strategy to boost video game sales. Although some directors were doubtful, after examining the estimated sales report of their latest video games, they saw a significant surge following Kishan's claim that Will Gates was becoming addicted to the video game Civilization I. With this proof, the board members praised CEO Will Gates for thinking ahead and even sacrificing his image to increase video game sales. Despite Will Gates being unaware of such a marketing strategy, except for Kishan, he could only nod as he received praise from some board members. Deep inside, however, Will Gates planned to call Shinro to provide an explanation. After the board meeting shifted from Will Gates' explanation to a discussion of the business portfolio plan, Will Gates went to his office and called Shinro Suzuki. It was night in Japan, and in Shinro Suzuki's residence in Minato Ward. Shin had just fallen asleep with Myra in his arms. Unaware, Shin and Myra didn't notice Shin's phone ringing, likely due to exhaustion. As time passed and morning arrived, Shin went to grab his phone first thing in the morning. Upon turning on the KRS phone, he noticed on the small screen that someone had just missed a call. This is why Shin grabs his phone first thing in the morning to check for messages or calls. Shin glanced at the name of the person who had missed his call and realized it was Will Gates. He tapped the soft keypad of his phone and saw that Will Gates had messaged him. Microsoft Gates, we need to talk. Microsoft Gates, I need an explanation. Upon seeing this, Shin's brows furrowed in confusion before realization set in. Oh. Is it because of that? Shin remembered instructing the marketing manager at Kishan to spread news about Will Gates being fascinated with the video game Civilization I, hoping to attract people and boost sales. Given that Will Gates held considerable influence in the USA, having cemented himself as the world's richest man with a net worth of almost $13 billion, it was evident how effective Kishan's marketing strategy would be by using Will Gates' name. The thought of reminding Will Gates about it crossed Shin's mind. Well, Shin just shrugged, sat up in bed, and then stood, walking to the restroom to wash his face and brush his teeth before having a shower. Although outwardly Japanese, he didn't fully embrace Japanese habits, so he didn't have the inclination to bathe every few hours like some locals. After his shower, he dressed and proceeded to the study. He then dialed Will Gates with his phone, and after a considerable wait, the call was finally answered. Will Gates was leisurely relaxing in his mansion in Beverly Hills when his phone rang. He turned on his phone to check the caller's identity and noticed it was someone named Suzuki. Without hesitation, Will answered the call. Soon, Shin's voice resonated through the phone. Hey, Gates. What's up? I didn't notice your call last night. Well, it was night here in Japan when you called. Suzuki. I believe you already know why I called, right? Apologies, Mr. Gates. However, I'm not entirely certain if your intention to call aligns with what I have in mind. Is it about the news regarding your newfound passion for a video game? That's correct. Why did you feature me in your latest magazine issue without permission? Not to mention, it was a report that could slightly impact my reputation. Well, it's just a piece highlighting your enjoyment of playing the video game Civilization I don't think it could harm you in any way. Well, it does cause me quite a bit of trouble. Well, I apologize, Mr. Gates. I had initially intended to ask for your permission, but I momentarily forgot. Will Gates fell momentarily silent. Then, Shin's voice resounded once more. Moreover, in the Kishan Power magazine, it didn't present that news as true, and wasn't the marketing quite effective. Will Gates couldn't refute that and simply said, well, I guess you're right. But next time, remember to ask for my permission. After the phone call ended, Shin faintly smiled. Will Gates couldn't complain too much, given that over time, Kishan had formed an alliance with Microsoft, gradually acquiring shares of the company. Kishan had managed to gather at least 4% of Microsoft shares, and they were gradually aiming for more. That 4% amounted to about 1.3 billion. Although Will Gates might desire to reciprocate with a similar investment in Kishan, unfortunately, Kishan is not a public company like Microsoft. So, for now, Will Gates could only let Shin and Kishan's actions slide. Well, he really couldn't do much about it. Given that the Kishan representative director on the board was also aiding Will Gates in the company, coupled with the undeniable utility of the Unreal Engine to Microsoft, he genuinely couldn't afford to offend Kishan or Shinro. Chapter 303, Civilization I and Web Development. Kishan rules headquarters, in Chairman Shin's office. Shin was playing Civilization I on his office computer. Civilization I of Kishan and Microsoft wasn't anything like the version of Civilization I in Shin's previous life. Kishan and Microsoft improved the video game Civilization I graphics. In Shin's previous life, the video game Civilization I was a 16 EGA, but in this parallel world, Kishan and Microsoft's Civilization I has SVGA graphics, offering a more detailed and visually appealing world. The Kishan and Microsoft Civilization I also made improvements to the user interface. Menus and options have been streamlined and organized for better usability, along with a mouse control scheme alongside keyboard commands. Animated units and landscapes, such as static sprites, have been replaced with simple animations for units and terrain features, adding visual dynamism to the video game. Additionally, a more complex diplomacy has been introduced. Basic alliances and tributes have been expanded with deeper diplomatic options like treaties, trade agreements, and cultural exchange. The video game now features enhanced espionage and abilities. Mechanics such as spying and sabotage have been added, along with diverse unit abilities and specializations. To increase the dynamic nature of the gameplay, more dynamic world events like natural disasters, revolutions, and cultural shifts have been introduced. Not only that, but Kishan has also given players the ability to create their own custom scenarios or modify existing ones for a more varied gameplay experience. Moreover, the game now supports multiplayer, both locally and online, with the assistance of the Kishan Play software. With improved sound and music, Shin understood why Will Gates would be willing to spend some of his precious time on the video game Civilization I. In fact, Shin was quite engrossed in playing the video game Civilization I. After a while of playing, he paused to draft the layout and plan for the video game that would be in production in the future. In the United States, after months of Kishan Foundation and WorldCom spreading awareness in several states, more and more people became aware of the Internet, and the number of Internet users continued to grow. Many websites gaining recognition and profiting from this trend included online platforms like Yahoo, the New York Times, Amazon, and, finally, the Kishan website. In 1995, there were only about 23,500 estimated websites worldwide. While this might seem substantial, the current number of websites is incomparable to what existed in the future. Most websites at that time were navigational nightmares with almost non-existent accessibility. This was true even for major platforms like Yahoo and the New York Times. The Kishan website recently underwent significant changes, distinguishing itself from the majority of websites. Kishan improved its websites, and many users noticed the impressive transformation. Although Kishan websites were already superior to others, the recent update made them even better. Kishan focused on clear and concise content, recognizing that Internet users in 1995 had slower download speeds and shorter attention spans. Prioritizing text over graphics, Kishan employed bullet points, headings, and simple navigations. Given that many users were still using dial-up with prolonged loading times, Kishan utilized smaller images, compressed files, and avoided background images or animations that could slow down loading. Leveraging image formats, Kishan used GIFs for simpler graphics and JPEGs for photos, optimizing their size for faster loading times. To enhance interactivity, especially considering the limited capabilities of JavaScript, Kishan incorporated simple forms, guestbooks, and polls to engage users on their improved websites. Kishan utilized frames to create a multi-page feel within a single web page, providing more content without causing excessive loading times. Most importantly, as Kishan observed the increase in internet users and traffic on their websites, they optimized their server configuration for caching and compression, further improving page load times. Thanks to this impressive update of Kishan websites, many users were able to recommend them to their friends. This resulted in more internet users discovering Kishan's website and increased traffic to the site. While Kishan websites are dedicated to video games, the discussions and the connections formed by certain users make it feel like a great platform for staying in touch with friends who are far away. Moreover, allowing users to post whatever they want, even if it's unrelated to video games, has made more internet users perceive the Kishan website as a platform for social interaction. In fact, when it comes to social interactions, the Kishan website forum has even surpassed Yahoo, a platform designed for connecting with others. The distinction between Kishan website forum and Yahoo lies in the fact that Yahoo's web page was filled with information, encompassing news headlines, weather updates, stock quotes, and links to various categories such as entertainment, sports, and travel. While Yahoo gained recognition for this comprehensive approach, the aesthetic of its web page was vastly inferior to Kishan websites. Despite this, many internet users still preferred Kishan, particularly for social interaction. However, for staying updated on the latest news or contacting someone privately, many still relied on Yahoo email. Meanwhile, the Amazon website was gaining recognition in the e-commerce category. With Kishan fully supporting the website and contributing to Amazon's advancements in shipping vehicles, logistics, and website improvement, many internet users became aware of Amazon. Thousands upon thousands of people had already ordered books on Amazon, and with the addition of video games to the lists, many internet users also placed orders for video games. Over time, as more internet users registered and logged in on Amazon, ordering their preferred items, the website's algorithm gradually improved. Web development in 1995 was still in its early stages, yet most people were unaware that Kishan was accelerating its progress as well. Chapter 304, Warcraft Influence. The Warcraft, Tides of Darkness, the sequel of the PC video game that became popular in the RTS genre, Warcraft, Orcs and Humans. Most of Warcraft series fans who knew the release of the video game, quickly went into the video game stores to buy the video game. The video game Warcraft, Orcs and Humans has gained a considerable influence in the video games industry and have fans all over the world since it's released for about a year already, and it was released in Asia, USA, Australia, and in several countries in Europe. With the Warcraft fanbase built over time, it can be seen just how the RTS video game popularity is, and in fact, with the multiplayer options such as local and with the video game the first to have online options when it comes to multiplayer option and to play with other people with the use of internet, just makes it evident how many people were attached to the video game Warcraft. With the release of the new Warcraft video game, of course many people, especially the people that is online gamers, were pretty much excited. With the latest Warcraft video game, many gamers were expecting a new strategy added, and its gameplay. The video game Warcraft was quite popular in the United States and in some parts of Europe or in Western Europe, and in fact, the PC video games except the KS1 video games were released in Japan, and in some parts of Europe and the United States, at the same time. In Western Europe, in Germany, United Kingdom, and France, had growing PC adoption and a developing interest in real-time strategy games. But what surprised the Kishan game developers of the PC video game was that the PC video game Warcraft, Tides of Darkness, became quite popular and talked in the country of South Korea. That's right, South Korea is one of the countries that was the early adopters and passion for strategy video games, and was charmed by the Warcraft introduced of the RTS or real-time strategy gameplay. The Kishan video game developers for PC didn't quite expect it since it was quite clear how the South Koreans hated the Japanese, and with the government propaganda of the fact that Japan should admit their crimes and pay the country of South Korea for the damages and crimes that the Japanese in the country over the years, it was indeed quite unexpected for the Kishan PC video game Warcraft to be quite the talks of the young people in the country. Although indeed the Kishan has made video games that was still quite popular in South Korea such as Super Mario, The Legend of Zelda, Donkey Kong, and more, but that's because it was exclusive distributed by the Samstar company, and even the consoles of the Japanese were distributed by the South Korean conglomerates, and besides, the younger generation of South Korea didn't really take those video games seriously except for the minority or children which forbids to play Japanese video games. Anyway, yet the PC video game Warcraft has really taken the attention of the South Korean young generation. And the fact that the Kishan PC video games were not exclusively distributed by Samstar alone for quite a while now, since there are PC video games distributors in the country, and that a dozens video game stores has been established for quite a few months already in the country was also a Japanese company, GameStop, made it evident for the South Koreans that the Warcraft were a Japanese video game, yet still gained popularity in the country of South Korea, made it more evident how charming. The PC video game Warcraft. The Kishan Play software was also one of the best seller in the South Korea, since it enables Kishan PC video games into online multiplayer. The engagement the PC video games were one of the reasons for why many people were attracted to PC video game than the consoles. In the United Kingdom, George just went to the available GameStop in Oxford Street, London to buy the sequel of the PC video game of Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, and also to buy the latest video games available for KS1. George was 15 years old. He became aware of video games because of his older brothers were playing on their SKES console. He was about 12 years old at that time, and his brothers played video games like Super Mario, The Legend of Zelda, Donkey Kong, Sonic the Hedgehog, and while he don't get to play much, but just watching his older brothers playing a video game has entertained him so much, and most importantly, it also influenced him as well. And so, over time, he also became a gamer, playing all kinds of stuff. Although most of the video games he played was from Kishan, he also played video games of Tora and Suzuki, and other video game entertainment companies as well. After turning the age of 14, that's when the time his elder brother returned home with a KS1 in hand. He remembered at that time how excited he was, and two of his older brothers were quite excited to see their elder brother just bought the latest console that has been hyped for a few weeks in UK. And George remembered when there's only 3 video games of KS1, and the first KS1 video game that created an impression towards him was the video game Resident Evil. It was the horror video game with one particular scene that has been carved in his mind. And the racing video games such as Kishan All-Stars Racing and the Need for Speed. Although George, who was a fan of cars and owned miniature cars toys that was given by his brothers, felt that the Need for Speed actually lacked in some sports cars models available in the video game. Although there are already sports cars models available in the video game, it was still lacking, but either way, George felt it was a good racing video game. Although what George didn't know was that the version of KS1 video games in Europe is vastly different to USA and Japan, as there are video games for US, EU and JP versions for different countries. After George bought the video games for PC and KS1, he went home with a smile on his face, and as soon as he returned home, he went to his room. Unlike before, George's elder brother already have his own family and became independent, while the other 2 older brothers of George was staying in dorms in college. So George became pretty much the only one living with his parents' house, and he can freely play video games using KS1 in the living room with limited time, and play video games in PC, except for school. George has much more freedom in playing video games as he can solo on the family computer, but he couldn't help but felt lonely sometimes. That's why, when he discovered that Kishan have a software that allowed their Warcraft, Orcs and Humans to be played multiplayer online, George became a bit addicted to online gaming, as he can interact and play with other people online. That's one of the reasons why he was hyped by the latest Warcraft PC video game. It can only mean that it has new features, lore, gameplay, and exciting strategy gameplay. Furthermore, he looked forward to playing the latest Warcraft with others online. Even though he often ended up on the losing side, he didn't really mind. During this time, multiplayer online features were relatively simple, lacking ranking systems or profiles to track wins and losses. As a result, players like George were spared the experience and meaning of a losing streak. Chapter 305, Warcraft 2. George took out the CD of Warcraft, Tides of Darkness from the CD case and inserted it into the CD slot of his computer. He was a real fan of the video game. In fact, there were several posters of Warcraft in his room, along with posters of Doom and Mortal Kombat. Additionally, there were KES and SKES video game characters' action figures displayed on the shelves. Calmly and skillfully, George installed the video game Warcraft into the computer after selecting the file directory. After a while, Warcraft, Tides of Darkness was successfully installed in MS-DOS. With great excitement, George immediately opened the video game. He selected the single-player option and human campaign option first. Then, the text of the timeline after the War of Humans and Orcs appeared, followed by the game intro animation. The animation depicted ships sailing in the sea in 3D. The ships sliced through waves shimmering with light. A gnomish flying machine, a mechanical beetle buzzing with gears and rivets, dipped overhead, casting a shadow that felt almost tangible. The narrator's voice, rich and booming, echoed tales of fallen kings and rising darkness, painting a grim yet thrilling picture of a world teetering on the brink. After the video game's introductory animation story, George started playing. After a short while, he was pleasantly surprised by how different Warcraft had become compared to its first video game. Not only does the new Warcraft video game feature deeper character development, but the gameplay is also quite impressive. It introduces more units and abilities, along with an isometric perspective. While retaining the charm of the first video game's 2D view, the isometric perspective of Warcraft, Tides of Darkness offers better visual clarity and unit positioning. Additionally, the zoomable terrain allows George to zoom in and out slightly on the battlefield, providing him with a better overview of strategic options and highlighting environmental details. Moreover, there are more detailed animation sequences for unit attacks, spell effects, and hero abilities, adding visual flourish and feedback. Enemy units have become much more challenging and now exhibit basic strategies. This is a significant improvement compared to Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, where enemy units lacked strategies but presented difficulty due to the player's disadvantage. Despite realizing it was time to sleep, George couldn't bring himself to do so. The engaging gameplay, impressive graphics, and captivating story kept him awake. The story of Warcraft progresses after the humans' war with orcs. As the humans rebuild their territory, darkness emerges. Terranaw's son, Arthas, succumbs to the corrupting influence of the fallen paladin Uther Lightbringer. Descending into madness, Arthas becomes a pawn of the Lich King, the leader of the undead scourge. Arthas murders his king, plunging Azeroth into a new era of chaos. The human campaign follows Jaina Proudmoore, a powerful sorceress and close friend of Arthas, as she grapples with understanding and confronting her former friend's descent into darkness. Jaina teams up with Thrall and the newly emerged Tauren to combat the scourge and Arthas' growing power. After a while, George finally fell asleep. He eagerly anticipates the rapid spread of Warcraft, Tides of Darkness in the UK, looking forward to playing multiplayer online with other players using the KP software. Shin has developed the Warcraft series differently in this world. With ample resources and funds, he significantly improved the PC video game. The first Warcraft, Orcs and Humans by Kishan closely resembled the original game in Shin's previous life. However, equipped with superior software, an extensive game developers department, and advanced video game development tools, Shin and the Kishan game developers were able to produce Warcraft, Tides of Darkness much better than the original in Shin's previous life. The vast difference between Warcraft I and Warcraft 2 was readily apparent even to the fans who had played the early versions of the PC video game Warcraft 2. Notably, there were improvements in graphics, gameplay, and the development of more solid and complex storylines. Furthermore, the video game introduced moral ambiguity by incorporating more nuanced choices and consequences, blurring the lines between good and evil. Players now faced morally difficult decisions, questioning their allegiances and contemplating the true cost of victory. Shin implemented better branching narratives in Warcraft 2, offering more than just campaign paths based on choosing a faction. The game allowed players' actions and missions to have lasting consequences, shaping the narrative and leading to different endings. Shin also expanded beyond the existing unit types by including specialized units with unique skills and tactical benefits. This expansion considered siege weapons, airship units, or hero-specific abilities to add strategic depth to the gameplay. Introduce neutral creatures on the map that players can engage with for resources or strategic advantages, similar to mechanics in future Warcraft titles. Enhance the AI of enemy units and bosses to heighten the challenge and adaptability to player strategies. Additionally, improve animation sequences. This is why gamers who were able to play the PC video game Warcraft 2 were captivated by the gameplay. Even those who weren't particularly impressed with Warcraft I felt the significant improvements and innovations that Kishan brought to Warcraft 2. Despite potential lag on older computers, Kishan implemented a graphics setting. As long as players set it to low graphics, the game runs smoothly even on less powerful computers. Kishan's commitment to providing graphics settings in their PC video games, not just Warcraft 2, truly deserves commendation. However, many gamers at that time, lacking technical knowledge, took for granted the effort required to input graphics settings in 1995. Why was it challenging to add graphics settings during this period? If it weren't for Kishan, other video game entertainment companies would struggle to implement it similarly. The development tools for graphics engines, excluding Kishan's software game engine, at this time were less mature and lacked functionalities for dynamic scaling or multiple settings. Implementing separate graphic options often demanded extensive coding and adjustments. In the 90s, developers had to consider compatibility with a broader range of hardware, making it difficult to create graphics settings that wouldn't cause problems on slower or weaker systems. Kishan's advanced software and Shin's ultimate control over Kishan companies made it possible. He could invest his money in video game production at any time, as he owned the company, and the company's budget was Shin's budget. Chapter 306, Unbelievable Ending. In Toshima Ward, Tokyo, Japan. In Miyata household, Yasuhiro was playing the horror video game, Silent Hill. Yasuhiro has been playing Silent Hill for hours now, and he thinks he is nearing the ending. To be honest, he already finished playing Silent Hill, but Yasuhiro knew that there are different kinds of endings in the video game. That's why he played it several times to see the other endings. But so far, he saw that the endings were the same except for some character Sybil Bennett escaping with Harry Mason, or to fight the final boss who was shining with light but turned into a monster, or as the final boss with the original form as a woman with shining light. The endings are according to the consequences the player has done while playing the video game. Quite so far, Yasuhiro has slightly changed his decisions and actions in the video game Silent Hill, and he was quite curious about the ending. Then, he finally faced the final boss again, and after defeating the boss, Harry Mason escaped the place. Yasuhiro couldn't help but frown as he felt the ending wasn't anything special, but then, after the screen darkened, a scene will play that will shock him. The scene depicted a 3D animation of a UFO in the sky, followed by Harry Mason running aimlessly in the area. Eventually, the UFO descended right in front of Harry Mason. With shock in Yasuhiro's eyes, he witnessed the high-tech door of the UFO opening, revealing aliens with a typical appearance descending from it. The aliens' voices and incomprehensible language resonated. In response, Harry Mason, with a shocked expression, turned towards the UFO and the aliens. With a quivering voice, he asked, "Who are you people? Did you see my daughter?" The aliens looked at each other, appearing confused. They seemed to communicate among themselves before approaching Harry Mason and apprehending him. "What are you doing? Stop! Did you see my daughter around here?" Harry Mason resisted, persistently inquiring about his daughter. Subsequently, Harry Mason was forcefully taken into the UFO by the aliens, and the craft flew off into the distance with credits rolling. This is unbelievable. Yasuhiro couldn't believe his eyes. He rubbed his eyes, only to still witness the scene of the sky where the UFO had flown off with the credits rolling. Following this, Yasuhiro hurried downstairs and called his friend on the telephone. Once the call connected, Yasuhiro shared the extraordinary experience he had just encountered today. "Minoru. You won't believe it. I achieved the UFO with aliens ending in the video game Silent Hill." After Yasuhiro relayed the details, Minoru simply shouted, "Don't fool me around. I am busy, and you call me for your jokes." Yasuhiro wanted to emphasize that he wasn't joking, but the telephone call abruptly ended as Minoru seemed to smash the telephone. Yasuhiro couldn't help but shake his head. He knew it. No one would believe him. In Moto Azabu, Minato Ward, Tokyo, Japan. At Azabu High School, a group of junior high school students were engaged in a discussion about video games right after their class had ended. A high school student with glasses spoke up as he adjusted his glasses. "Have any of you played Metal Gear Solid I? It's amazing, right?" The other 4 students nodded, and a young man with a bowl cut added, "It was such a thrilling video game." "Yeah, and Silent Hill, too. It's so scary. I finished the video game, but I don't think I can play it again." "Really? I found that horror video game so exciting." The young man with glasses grinned upon realizing that the discussion was turning to Silent Hill. He said, "Guys, I'll share something about Silent Hill that will shock all of you." His 4 friends exchanged glances and directed their attention to the young man with glasses. One student asked, "Really? Something that will shock us? What is it? Is it about the ending of Silent Hill?" The young man with dyed hair inquired. The young man with glasses was a bit surprised and responded, "How did you know?" The one with dyed hair chuckled, "Haha, I knew it. You want to say that Silent Hill has different endings, right?" "Ah? Is it about that? Many people already knew it." "Yeah, and it is certainly not shocking." Undeterred by his friend's lack of enthusiasm, the young man with glasses maintained a smile. He said, "It's true that knowing Silent Hill has different endings isn't really shocking." Pausing for effect and observing his friend's confusion, he continued, "What I'm about to tell you is the ending I got." The other four friends became more interested, and the young man with dyed hair thoughtfully stroked his chin, saying, "Oh? Are you saying you got a unique and shocking ending?" "That's right. I did get a unique ending." The young man with glasses adjusted his glasses, reflecting sunlight. With a smug smile, he said, "And you won't believe it." "Oh, what is it?" "I don't think it's really that shocking." "Was it just like the ending of Metroid and Super Metroid?" The young man with glasses smiled and said, "No. I got a UFO and aliens ending in Silent Hill." As soon as the young man with glasses said this, they fell into an incredulous silence. "Can you repeat that again? It seems we must have misheard it." The young man with dyed hair said, looking at the young man with glasses. "I got the UFO and aliens ending in Silent Hill." The young man with glasses, named Hero, repeated with a smug smile as he adjusted his glasses. There was a momentary silence, and then the young man with a bowl cut shouted, "Are you an idiot? A UFO and aliens in a horror video game like Silent Hill? Who would believe that? Right. No one will believe that. Are you still dreaming, Hero?" Hero smiled and said, "See? I knew that none of you would believe it. Yet. Because you made that up. There's no way there's an ending like that. Yet, it is really ridiculous. If there was such an ending in the video game Silent Hill, I would not be accepted by my crush." Ha ha ha. Hero's other four friends couldn't believe Hero and playfully talked among themselves. Chapter 307, Forum Hot Topic. The ending of Silent Hill spread out in the Kishan Japanese forum. Discussions about it, whether it was true or not, were discussed. In fact, the ending was not only discovered in Japan. As the early release of KS1 video games happened in Japan, after just a few days, the KS1 video games became available in other countries. These included several countries in Asia and, finally, the USA, UK, Germany, and France. The unbelievable UFO and aliens ending of Silent Hill were also discussed in the Kishan website forum, such as the USA or Europe forum. Besides Japan, the UFO and aliens ending of Silent Hill was also widely discussed in the Kishan USA forum. However, that ending of UFO and aliens, said to be witnessed by other players, was not believed by the majority of gamers. In the Kishan English forum, a Kishan forum user posted a question. Don.Mario_Corleone posted, "UFO and aliens ending in a horror video game like Silent Hill? Who made this up?" In the comments, Sunny Boy 1, "I don't know, but that ending just became a topic in the past few days on this site, and I'm starting to wonder whether there was such an ending." Don.Mario_Corleone Sunny Boy 1, "I know. I myself doubt there was such an ending, but I just know it was too ridiculous to be true, ha ha ha." Luigi_Brazai Don.Mario_Corleone, "Hey, a Corleone fellow. How are you?" Sonic_D_Maniac, "I'll tell you, the ending was real. I experienced it myself." Don.Mario_Corleone Sonic_D_Maniac, "I don't believe you. Especially with that username of yours. There are doubts, and some people believed, even though they haven't seen such an ending in the horror video game Silent Hill just yet." Although the topic of the unbelievable ending of the horror video game Silent Hill was quite popular in the Kishan website forums for a few days, the majority of gamers didn't really believe it. They thought it became popular due to gamers' curiosity and the possibility that there was such an unbelievable ending. The unbelievable ending topic slightly spread on the Kishan EU website forum, but it gained significant traction, especially in the USA and Japan. Meanwhile, in Shin's office, he noticed the UFO and aliens ending of Silent Hill from the Kishan website forum was spreading. Shin couldn't help but wryly smile. He hadn't expected that just a few weeks after the release of Silent Hill, the secret UFO and aliens ending had already been seen by other gamers and was spreading on the Kishan website. This secret UFO and aliens ending of Silent Hill was also the ending of Silent Hill in Shin's previous life. However, unlike the secret ending in Shin's previous life, which was just a picture without animation, the Kishan Silent Hill featured animated sequences. The motions of the UFO, the high-tech door opening, and the aliens walking down from the UFO were all part of the animation. The animations were even in 3D, accompanied by sound and music, including the sound effects of the UFO, aliens, and footsteps. Shin had put a considerable effort into creating a better secret ending for the video game compared to his previous life. However, the secret ending of the horror video game Silent Hill spread quickly among other players. Perhaps the eye-catching 3D computer-generated animations played a role in its rapid spread. The availability of Kishan websites to gamers also contributed to the dissemination of topics related to video games. Although the topic of the secret ending, UFOs, and aliens in the horror video game Silent Hill was not experienced by the majority of KS1 gamers, dozens of KS1 gamers around the world were able to experience the secret ending. These gamers spread it online, claiming to have seen the ending. Additionally, there are pretentious gamers who falsely claim to have seen the secret ending to attract attention. Sawa Arita, in his office, also encountered the topic of the secret ending in the horror video game Silent Hill. As a self-proclaimed professional gamer providing reviews and tips, he couldn't help but doubt the existence of such an ending. However, if the ending did exist and he confirmed it by playing the game, releasing the confirmation in a magazine could attract attention due to his established reputation in the Japanese gaming community. Many gamers would likely try to verify the existence of the secret ending in Silent Hill. As Sawa Arita became increasingly occupied with his founded company, he seldom played video games, causing his gaming skills to become rusty in SKES and KS1 gaming. Sawa Arita would likely need some time to confirm the existence of such a secret ending. Although he could delegate the task to others, Sawa Arita preferred personally confirming the secret ending in the video game Silent Hill. He wanted to investigate and verify whether such an ending truly existed. Initially, he needed to contact gamers who claimed to have witnessed the ending, interview them about their gameplay, and follow their lead to reach this mysterious conclusion. After a while, Sawa Arita managed to contact 3 gamers who had claimed to see the secret ending. He then arranged for them to be escorted to his company's headquarters. Subsequently, the gamers were interviewed and guided to the gaming hub of Sawa Arita and his friends, where they would collectively play Silent Hill to unveil the secret ending, relying on the gamers' recollections of the steps leading to it. Sawa Arita felt a sense of excitement, reminiscent of the time when he discovered the various endings of Metroid. This endeavor brought smiles to Sawa Arita and his friends, who had achieved prosperity by reviewing video games and providing tips to gamers through the magazine Shonen Jump. Whether they would genuinely witness and experience the secret ending of Silent Hill remained uncertain. However, Sawa Arita and his friends, now busy individuals, found joy in the process and gameplay, as if they had returned to a time 5 or 4 years ago when they played together in their secret gaming hub. Chapter 308, Pirates. While the topic of the secret ending of the horror video game Silent Hill was gradually dying down in the Kishan website forums, in several countries in Asia, pirate video games became very much evident. In fact, pirated video games didn't only prosper in several countries in Asia, especially in China and Southeast Asia, but also in some parts of the USA and Europe. Pirated video games of SKES and KS1, TSX Fusion were spreading as well. Despite Kishan's countermeasures regarding pirated video games, they still sell. Especially popular video games for KS1 and TSX Fusion produced by video game entertainment companies attracted many buyers. After TSX Fusion had been available in Japan for months, the TSX Fusion US and EU console version was distributed to the USA and Europe around September. Now in November, TSX Fusion sales were actually quite decent. Although still behind Kishan, in its first release in the USA and Europe, it surged in sales and surpassed the sales of KS1 in the first 2 weeks before declining. These results were surprising to Tora Suzuki. What they would soon realize was that pirated video games actually helped in the sales of TSX Fusion. As video games for KS1 were not available on the KS1 console due to ongoing attempts by pirates to breach the anti-piracy measures, CDs for KS1 were still unavailable. As an alternative, the pirates focused on releasing pirated CDs for TSX Fusion. TSX Fusion's anti-piracy measures were less complicated and more vulnerable to pirated games, making them available just a week after its release in the USA and Europe. The affordability of pirated games contributed to the early success of TSX Fusion's overseas sales. Many gamers, preferring KS1 but unable to access its games, reluctantly turned to TSX Fusion. Eventually, pirated games for KS1 became available at the end of November in the USA, Europe, and Asia. In a conference meeting at Tora Suzuki in Tokyo, Japan, executives reviewed the sales report of TSX Fusion both in Japan and overseas. While behind Kishan KS1, TSX Fusion's sales were decent and even catching up overseas. However, when informed that the console's success was due to pirated games, the executives fell silent. They couldn't believe that their TSX Fusion sales were driven by the lack of robust anti-piracy measures. Despite acknowledging the success, they were uneasy about the fact that their console sold well because of its accessibility to pirated games. Although pirated video games contributed to the decent success of TSX Fusion overseas, legitimate video games from Tora Suzuki and other entertainment companies also achieved respectable sales. The executives discussed allowing pirated games on their current console while planning to implement enhanced anti-piracy measures for their next console, currently in research and development. It appears that pirated video games played a role in boosting our TSX Fusion sales. While reluctant to admit it, piracy could promote our console and its original games, one executive mentioned. But that doesn't mean we'll condone piracy. We should raise awareness and encourage gamers to choose legitimate options, another added. When it comes to video game piracy, Kishan should be the most affected, right? Haha, exactly. They're collecting royalties from us and other companies. Piracy should hit their pockets, shouldn't it? We aren't significantly affected, and we've even profited slightly from game piracy. But as for Kishan? It should be Kishan worrying about video game piracy, not us, Idori Tanaka smiled and remarked. Kishan deserves it for almost single-handedly dominating the industry. Yet, Kishan may not appear to dominate the industry with a 48% share, but with nearly 99% of royalties from 32-bit console games, they silently control the industry. Now that you mention it, that does seem to be the case. It's attributed to their remarkably advanced software. Idori Tanaka listened attentively, stroking his chin. During the Kishan conference meeting, Shin and the executives engaged in business discussions. The topic shifted to pirated video games, and they had just received a report that pirated games for KS1 were spreading in several Asian and European countries, as well as some states in the USA. Despite the anti-piracy measures in our KS1 console, pirates still found a way to breach it and make their games available on KS1. We should contact the authorities in those countries and apprehend those involved in pirating video games. Indeed, Kishan profits from the royalty fees collected on sales from 90% of video game entertainment companies. Let's not tolerate this. Shin, upon hearing this, calmly responded, while we must take action, I don't believe we need to go to such extremes. Chairman, piracy is impacting our business. We should take it that far. An impeccably dressed, portly man asserted adamantly, seemingly trying to impress Shin. No. Even if we catch people pirating video games, others will emerge. Additionally, authorities in other countries may not fully assist us in eliminating these pirates, as they could be backed by syndicates or organizations unknown to us. Shin, with clasped hands and elbows resting on the table, wore a serious expression. To be honest, he wasn't certain if what he said was true, but he fabricated it to discourage the executives from being overly insistent on pursuing the pirates. Really? Is it that serious? I suppose that's plausible. Pirated video games wouldn't gain such popularity without someone supporting them, right? Shin nodded, but internally, he thought, while I fabricated that, catching pirates won't solve the issue, it's an endless loop, and involving authorities and offering rewards is a resource waste. Furthermore, Shin was aware that pirated video games actually boosted the sales of video game consoles. He recalled that in his previous life, one reason for the failure of the Nintendo Virtual Boy was Nintendo's strict stance on pirated games. If the pirates believed it would be easy to pirate video games for KS1, they were mistaken. Shin grinned wickedly. KS1's anti-piracy measures were much more intricate. While it might allow pirated games to run for a while, the scenario would eventually change. In certain video games, players would get stuck in specific areas, or encounter eerie scenes in horror titles like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. After various scenes in the games, there would be a moment where Super Mario, in his distinctive voice, would say, "Thank you for playing the video game demo." Shin wasn't sure if others who had recently bought KS1 pirated games had experienced this, but he was confident they would soon encounter it. Chapter 309, Bootlegger. In a certain Asian country, a vendor peddling pirated CD video games was surrounded by a group of eager young people. "Boss, do you have video games for KS1?" Jeff, a young man perusing the video game case at the vendor, inquired of the bootlegger. "You've come to the right place, sir. Our vendor sells affordable KS1 video games that are not only cheap but also 100% working." The bootlegger smiled, assuring not just Jeff but also the other youths eyeing the video games at his stall, along with those browsing CD video games. "Really? A few weeks ago, I bought KS1 video games from another vendor who claimed the same thing, but they didn't work at all. They just kept loading and never worked." Jeff recounted his disappointing experience to the bootlegger. Other young people browsing for video games were silently listening, sharing similar experiences. Many had opted for pirated video games for TSX Fusion, having learned not to trust KS1 video games. Some considered testing just one CD video game for KS1 to check its functionality. Anticipating such skepticism, the bootlegger smiled and said, "Haha, I expected someone to respond that way. As proof, I brought a TV in my KS1 here to demonstrate that the video games at our vendor work." The young people around the vendor were surprised. Only then did they notice a TV in the booth with the bootlegger, connected to a KS1. "We can test KS1 video games." Jeff and the others perusing the video games in the vendor were taken aback. "That's correct. This way, we can provide evidence that our affordable KS1 video games are functional," the bootlegger said with a smile. After absorbing all the information, a group of young men promptly handed over video games from the vendor, urging the bootlegger to test them. "Can you try this video game for me, boss? Boss, please give this video game a try, and I'll buy it. Boss, what about this video game?" Jeff also wanted the bootlegger to test the video game he was interested in. The bootlegger examined the video games the group presented, noticing they were the latest releases by Kishan, Metal Gear Solid I and Silent Hill. These two games had gained significant popularity in the country recently, promoted on various TV programs and endorsed by a famous celebrity known for their appreciation of KS1 video games. Consequently, both young and older generations began showing interest in KS1 video games. "All right, I'll test these video games, and I'll remove the CD from the video game case you provided as proof that I'm not deceiving any of you," the bootlegger assured with a smile. This way, he aimed to dispel any suspicion that he might substitute a working, original KS1 video game CD to trick customers into buying non-functional copies. Upon hearing the bootlegger's assurances, the young people breathed a sigh of relief. Under their watchful eyes, the bootlegger carefully extracted the CD from the video game case they had personally provided. Having removed the video game CD from its case, the bootlegger proceeded to insert it into the KS1 CD slot. On the television screen, the distinctive logos of KS1 and Kishan appeared, followed by the introductory animation of Metal Gear Solid I. Witnessing the pirated CD video games in action, the crowd felt a surge of excitement, realizing they could acquire affordable video games for KS1. Simultaneously, they attentively observed, hopeful that the pirated video game would continue to function beyond the introductory animation. Having experienced issues with other vendors where the games either remained stuck loading or played only an animated intro story, they quietly scrutinized the television, much like Jeff and others who had previously purchased pirated video games. Following the video game's animated story introduction, the moment of truth arrived as the bootlegger took control of the KS1 controller. The young people were not disappointed, the in-game character moved seamlessly, and the bootlegger played for a solid 10 minutes. The crowd surrounding the vendor became convinced that these pirated video games were indeed legitimate and functional. "I'll take these two KS1 video games, please. I'll grab this one. Count me in too, boss. I'll go for this one and that one too." The bootlegger wore a wide grin as he accepted payments, carefully placing the pirated video game CD cases in plastic and handing them over. When it came to Jeff's turn, as the bootlegger packaged his purchased pirated video game CDs, Jeff inquired, "Boss, what if mine doesn't work, unlike the ones you tested?" The others shared the same concern, exchanging glances with the bootlegger. With a reassuring smile, the bootlegger replied, "If the video games you purchased don't work, you can return to this place. I'll personally test them, and if they're not functioning, you can replace them with other video games from this vendor." Jeff was somewhat surprised but not entirely, considering it was a common practice in his country to replace non-functional items purchased from vendors. For instance, pirated CD films could be tested on the spot with a DVD player. Jeff nodded and said, "All right." Excitedly heading home with the pirated video games in hand, Jeff, a student with limited funds, couldn't afford many original video games for 32-bit consoles. He occasionally bought one original video game but preferred exploring the pirated video games vendor for more options. Most of his purchases were from TSX Fusion since the majority of pirated video games were compatible with that console. While Jeff's family wasn't affluent, they weren't impoverished either. His father managed to gift Jeff and his younger brother TSX Fusion and KS1 consoles, but the family owned only a few original video games. The TSX Fusion library thrived with pirated games, whereas the KS1 collection remained limited due to the high cost of originals. Despite favoring TSX Fusion in his gaming sessions, Jeff secretly longed to play more on KS1. Memories of his elementary days, playing frequently on KS, lingered in his mind. Chapter 310, Pirated Video Game Gameplay. Jeff was actually a Kishan fan, and he still remembered when the SKES came out. He waited for the SKES and its video games to fall in price before finally buying the SKES and its video games. At that time, Jeff thought he could finally follow the trend with his friends by owning SKES. However, in just a few months after that, Kishan released their KS1. Only after a month of KS1's release, the KS1 was released in their country, and Jeff felt left behind in the trend once more. It was only when his father bought a KS1 for his birthday that Jeff was really happy and could bond again with his gamer friends. The problem was that his KS1 lacked video games, although there were already dozens of video games available for the KS1 in the market. After returning home from school, the house felt pretty lonely. His father and mother were both working, and his younger brother was with his mother, who is working in the clothing company as a patternist. Jeff went into the living room, where the television and the two consoles, KS1 and TSX Fusion, were set up. As the KS1 was rarely played, the TSX Fusion was the one connected to the television. Jeff disconnected the TSX Fusion from the television and connected the KS1. After setting that up, Jeff inserted the Metal Gear Solid I pirated video game CD into the KS1 CD slot. After that, the KS1 and Kishan logo intro started, and after that, it was finally the video game animation intro story. Jeff observed seriously, as it was finally the moment of truth, the gameplay. He controlled the in-game character, Solid Snake, and after a while, Jeff was pleasantly surprised that the pirated video game indeed worked. After playing for several minutes, Jeff became a bit worried about the infamous Kishan anti-piracy screen. However, he was somewhat relieved that as he continued to play, there was no anti-piracy message so far. As time passed, Jeff played the video game, and his worries that it might stop working dwindled until they finally disappeared. Having played for an hour, Jeff's worry was gone, and he felt that he could play the video game all day if not for his parents restricting his gaming time. Jeff was immersed in playing Metal Gear Solid I seriously, focusing on the intense gameplay in the snowy area with the captivating music. From what Jeff had learned so far about Solid Snake, he was a playboy, flirting with Mei Ling and Meryl, the two hot and beautiful women. While Jeff was deeply engrossed in completing a mission in the snowy area, he sensed something was not right. The sound effects, such as footsteps and howling wind, seemed to lower in volume, becoming nearly inaudible as if something unusual was happening nearby. Then, the intense background music that had been playing vigorously faded out. Jeff was a bit confused, thinking this might be a downside of the pirated video game, but he could still continue playing. After defeating the tank, the pre-rendered animations of the conversation between Shaman and General Ivan played out. From the conversation, the in-game character Solid Snake was about to face General Ivan next. Jeff was already thrilled, and he didn't mind the downside of lowered sound effects and the absence of a music soundtrack. After the video game loading, Jeff was surprised that the game didn't proceed. Instead, it returned to the moment when in-game Solid Snake was in conversation with Meryl. What happened? Jeff muttered, becoming annoyed as he thought it must be another downside of the pirated video game. So, he spent some time playing through it again. But, as before, the sound effects and the music soundtrack disappeared over time, and the video game suddenly froze. Oh no! Don't tell me the infamous Kishan anti-piracy screen will appear! Jeff exclaimed, his worries resurfacing. But then, after the hang, the video game played out again. However, it repeated the scene and conversation of Solid Snake and Meryl. It keeps repeating. Jeff muttered with a hint of irritation. He went through the conversation of Solid Snake and Meryl again. With Solid Snake flirting and Meryl responding, "Oh, I doubt that." Jeff wanted the conversation to finish quickly, but Solid Snake and Meryl seemed to stop talking. Feeling annoyed again, Jeff thought it must be another downside of the pirated video game. As he was about to open the KS1 CD slot to restart the video game, Solid Snake and Meryl spoke at the same time, making it impossible for Jeff not to hear their words. "Thanks for playing the video game demo. Please buy the original video game from legitimate store distributors to finally be able to play the full video game. Thank you. Sincerely, Kishan Game Developers." After hearing that with the deep voice of Solid Snake and the soft, captivating voice of Meryl, Jeff's eyes widened. He completely understood English, which astonished him. It was the infamous Kishan anti-piracy. Jeff couldn't help but exclaim and smile wryly. To be honest, he wasn't even mad. For Kishan to handle pirated video games like this, he figured he couldn't complain that much since he was able to play the KS1 video game for at least an hour, right? At least he confirmed the fact that the latest Kishan video game named Metal Gear Solid I, hyped as a great video game, was well deserved. Jeff guessed the other video games released with Metal Gear Solid I to be equally good, as they were also hyped and popular in his country's gaming community. Even celebrities or famous singers in his country who played video games during their free time praised Kishan's latest KS1 video games. Initially, Jeff thought it was just Kishan sponsoring those people, but it seems like Kishan was still the good old Kishan in Jeff's impression from the 8-bit and 16-bit video game era. Chapter 311, Commercial Real Estate Development. The gamers who purchased pirated video games in certain parts of Asia believed that KS1 pirated video games were finally fully compatible with their KS1 console, only to be somewhat disappointed. In a particular pre-rendered scene, the characters of the video game they were playing expressed, "Thanks for playing the video game demo. Please buy the original video game from legit store distributors to finally be able to play the full video game. Thank you." While these gamers didn't experience the infamous Kishan anti-piracy screen, those who encountered the KS1 anti-piracy measure of Kishan firsthand were left speechless. It may not be as intimidating as the SKES Kishan anti-piracy screen, and not as unsettling, but the in-game characters, whom players had slowly grown attached to, sincerely encouraged them to purchase the original video game from legitimate distributors, convincing some gamers to indeed buy the original one from legit video game stores. While other gamers wanted to return their half-working KS1 pirated video games to the vendor for a replacement, the vendor refused after testing the video game, claiming it was functioning. Even when gamers argued that the video game would stop working after half an hour or an hour of play, the bootleggers just scoffed, insisting that it was still functional. With responses like "You are buying a cheap video game, so you should have expected it to be pirated, you buy it at your own risk." From most bootleggers, gamers found it challenging to counter. As December approached, the Kishan website forums buzzed with discussions about the upcoming Kishan video game, Grand Theft Auto 3. Amidst myriad posts, gamers shared their experiences with GTA I and II. The majority didn't really like GTA I, but most enjoyed GTA 2. Despite expectations for the KS1 video game GTA 3, a few gamers expressed concerns about it being similar to GTA I and II. Fortunately, most gamers reassured them that GTA 3 would be vastly different, according to Kishan Power magazine and the preview of the video game graphics image printed in the magazine for readers to see. From the gameplay of some GTA I and II gamers, expectations for the upcoming GTA 3 were already taking shape. As discussions about the upcoming video game GTA 3 unfolded, a few weeks after the hype of playable pirated video games on KS1, the topic of Kishan's anti-piracy measures also gained attention. The conversation revolved around video game characters encouraging players to buy the original game, with in-game characters expressing sentiments like, "Thanks for playing the video game demo." This intrigued gamers purchasing original video games from legitimate stores. Some gamers intentionally bought a KS1 pirated video game to witness the interesting scene of the Kishan anti-piracy measure. People were drawn to experiences that genuinely piqued their curiosity, especially when aligned with their interests. In fact, when the Kishan anti-piracy in SKES was discussed, albeit not as widely as now, it was attributed to the absence of the Kishan website forum in the SKES era. Topics like that weren't as prevalent due to slower internet speeds in 1993. As the internet industry evolved over time, approaching the end of 1995, internet speeds, though still slower compared to the future, became usable. With waiting times ranging from several seconds to a few minutes, individuals could access websites, including images and even videos if they were willing to wait a day for the video to load. For those who have experienced and witnessed the anti-piracy measures of KS1, posts like Robotnik ones as expected of Kishan are common. Gang boss expresses skepticism. I was initially suspicious of working pirated video games for KS1. How could Kishan allow it? I felt that even if the pirated video game seems to work at first, there will be a surprise after playing for a while. And it seems like I was right. Heart_Snake remarks, Kishan is much stricter than my dad. Kishan forever proudly declares, no piracy allowed with our boy Kishan. Only legit games in the hood, y'all. Meanwhile, in Akihabara's Electric Town, a few Kishan popular IPS establishments have already emerged. These include a Pokemon restaurant and cafe, and construction is underway for a dedicated building for anime and video games, complete with billboards. Buildings such as Akiba Gamers or Animate were also under construction. Shin was recreating structures he had visited during a business trip to Akihabara Electric Town in his previous life. Additionally, Shin aimed to emulate the famous maid restaurants from his past life, ones that would eventually be endorsed by Kishan. While Kishan harbored ambitions to establish numerous properties on their acquired land, Shin had purchased the land in Akihabara Electric Town with the goal of transforming it into a commercial district. Hence, Kishan invested in modernizing the area's infrastructure, incorporating wider streets, improved sewage systems, and a reliable electricity supply. These enhancements were intended to attract potential businesses and residents. Kishan implemented targeted zoning, establishing regulations that encourage specific businesses aligned with the desired theme. This includes electronics stores, appliance vendors, and game centers. In terms of community building, Kishan is gearing up to organize events and festivals, aiming to attract people and foster a sense of community within the district. Events such as electronics expos, gaming tournaments, and music festivals are in the pipeline. Kishan's cosplay event in Akihabara marks its initial foray into community building. Recognizing its limitations in redeveloping and enhancing the Electric Town infrastructure independently, Kishan plans to attract major electronics and technology companies to set up flagship stores, serving as anchors for further development. Offering tax breaks or preferential conditions could incentivize their participation. Kishan has extended invitations to several electronic technologies companies, ETCs, presenting them with the overall plan for the land to generate interest. Surprisingly, companies like Toyota have already shown interest. Other notable players, including Apple, Samstar, and Microsoft, existing partners with Kishan, are also keen on establishing stores in the planned commercial district. Kishan's growing interest in the commercial real estate development business is evident, particularly with the nearing completion of the long-anticipated Jurassic Park attractions currently under construction in the USA. Chapter 312, GTA 3. In the USA, December 12, 1995. The latest video games of KS1, such as Metal Gear Solid I and Silent Hill, were already released in Japan, Asia, and the USA. The video games were well received by gamers worldwide. The eagerly awaited video game GTA 3 was first released in Japan, receiving a positive response from Japanese players. Now, GTA 3 was also about to be released in the USA. Gamers in the USA were thrilled since they had read in magazines that GTA 3 revolved around crimes and thugs, with the setting and theme based in the USA. Some gamers were quite expectant. A woman named Hilda went to nearby video game stores to buy her younger son a game for his birthday. Driving and parking near the GameStop store, she stepped out and saw many people, mostly young, browsing inside. Hilda found it hard to believe that such a retail store was established just a few months ago. Its stores were reportedly already making a big impact on video game retail in various parts of the USA. Hilda, an executive at Walmart, understood the impressive achievements of the store. Simultaneously, she pondered whether the rapid success of the retail company GameStop was due to the gradual popularity of video games. Approaching the counter, Hilda politely greeted the staff, saying, "Hello." The salesman nonchalantly responded, "Yes, ma'am, what do you want?" Hilda inquired, "Can you recommend some of the best video games here for KS1? The salesman, nodding, asked, "Is it for you or someone else?" "It's for my younger son, 9 years old. He's a fan of video games, especially KS1 video games," Hilda explained with a smile. Understanding such situations, the salesman nodded and said, "Do you want the latest ones, ma'am?" Hilda affirmed, "Yes, the newly released ones that my younger son always talks about." "All right, I'll recommend the GTA 3 video game, ma'am," the salesman said, taking something from the counter and showing it to Hilda. Curious, Hilda examined the game's title, Grand Theft Auto 3, scrutinizing it before nodding and saying, "All right, I'll take this game." The salesman, seizing the opportunity, recommended more video games to Hilda, who seemed unfamiliar with the selection. "Thank you for your patronage," the salesman, now with a wide smile, even imitated a Japanese-style bow. Satisfied, Hilda nodded and left the store with several video games for her son, wondering if he would be pleased. Back at the store, the salesman faced criticism from colleagues. "Why did you sell her that game? It's not suitable for a 9-year-old. "Oh, you mean GTA 3? The salesman grinned and said, "Who cares? I earned a commission, and that kid will thank me later for recommending the game to his mom. Your greediness knows no bounds." Ha ha ha. Returning home, Hilda surprised her younger son in the living room by presenting the gift. Her youngest son was already celebrating with his friends, and after a while, Hilda presented the video games to her son, named David. As soon as David took hold of the video game cases, he looked excited and happy. Simultaneously, his friends appeared envious. "Bro, your mom bought you that game. Let's play it, quick." "Yeah, my dad doesn't want me to play it." "Come on. Let's play that video game." Encouraged by his friends, David nodded. Meanwhile, Hilda, hearing their conversation, was initially confused but decided to let it go. Seeing David and his friends setting up the television and KS1, Hilda simply said, "Have fun, kids." Unaware that the kids would be playing a crime and thugs-themed video game. The kids eagerly gazed at the television screen as the title logo of GTA 3 appeared. The game unfolded with a cinematic sequence, featuring the pre-rendered intro story. It commenced with a man running and exiting a door, followed by a woman pointing a gun at him. "Sorry, babe. I'm an ambitious girl. And you? You're just a small time." The woman shot the man, who crumpled to the floor. The pre-rendered story continued, captivating the kids' attention. The protagonist, Claude Speed, found himself handcuffed and blindfolded in the back of a police car. A transfer to a new prison went awry when the cop's car collided with a tanker truck, triggering an explosion that set the stage for ensuing chaos. Claude emerged from the wreckage, disoriented. Though free, he was surrounded by flames and gunfire. Discarding the handcuffs, he made a run for it, dodging bullets and navigating the burning debris. The kids found the intro quite exciting, and David, intrigued by the intro alone, joined his friends in playing the video game. Initially aimless, they engaged in activities like hitting someone on the road. Shin played the GTA 3 in KS1, and he can say that the graphics were quite bland compared to the original GTA 3 in his previous life. Although Shin was successful in attempting to port the open-world video game, such as GTA 3, in the 32-bit MIPS with a 64-bit data bus KS1, it was still quite limited. The graphics were still quite blocky, even though it was 2D pre-rendered to look like 3D, it was still lacking. Shin also had to cut the contents of the game, and the buildings didn't look like buildings at all. But as this world was still in 1995 with the 32-bit gaming era, there was really nothing much for Shin to do. "I guess I'll just have to remaster the game when the 128-bit console is completed." Shin smiled. The good thing with the Kishan and Samstar partnership was that the console development of Kishan was doing very well. In fact, Kishan would complete the K64 in a month or two, but Shin would not release it. Why? Because of the market saturation. Kishan had just released KS1 after the SKES and so on, and the market didn't even fully enjoy and utilize the SKES before KS1 became available, diminishing the value proposition of the SKES and hurting its sales. Maybe after the KS1 had been around in the market for a few years more, Kishan would release the K64. Chapter 313, Kishan World. The Kishan World is a growing in popularity theme park in the USA. It grew in popularity, with the Kishan IPs such as Super Mario, Donkey Kong, Jurassic Park, and some Pokémon cafe and restaurant also available within the Kishan World. The Kishan World has become increasingly popular in the past few weeks since its opening. With the inclusion of the highly famous film Jurassic Park in the theme park alone, it's not surprising for it to be widely renowned. Although the film Jurassic Park is from 3 years ago, its popularity and fame are still evident in the year 1995. Moreover, the inclusion of famous IPs as part of the Kishan world, featuring beloved game characters such as Super Mario, Link, Zelda, Bowser, and even the Princess Peach mascot, entertains children who truly idolize video game characters like Mario. However, what truly captures widespread popularity in the Kishan world are the Pokemon mascots, especially the well-known Pikachu. Even people who haven't watched its anime are drawn to Pikachu's popularity, particularly among kids and couples. Many visitors take pictures with Pikachu, and the Pokemon Cafe and restaurant in the Kishan world are bustling with people. Some are playing on their Game Boy, while others are there just to capture moments in the cafe or restaurant. The Pokemon Cafe and restaurant in the Kishan world are uniquely designed with themes from the anime and Pokemon. The bowl resembles a Pokeball, featuring iconic red and white halves forming a perfectly spherical bowl. The middle between the bowl and lid acts as a button, and when customers push it, the lid of the Pokeball bowl opens, releasing the enticing aroma of the food. The smoky and fragrant aroma of the seafood dish, named after a Pokemon called Bulbasaur Bouillabaisse, fills the air. This flavorful seafood stew features shrimp, mussels, and clams, served with crusty bread for dipping. The green broth, colored with spinach, resembles Bulbasaur's bulb. The Pokeball bowl employs technology similar to a rice cooker, keeping the food hot at the right temperature to maintain its freshness. Desserts, such as Pika pancake stacks, fluffy buttermilk pancakes shaped like Pikachu's face, are served with berry drizzle and whipped cream ears. The diverse and creative menu at the Pokemon Cafe and restaurant is one of the reasons why it has become a hit with customers. Mom, why did they name it after Bulbasaur? Did they cook Bulbasaur? A curious boy asks, pointing at the seafood in the Pokeball bowl. The woman in her 30s responds, of course not. Pokemon aren't meant for consumption. Yet, but we eat animals, right? It's not the same, Chad. With the notable establishments in the Kishan world and its widespread popularity with daily visits, even Walt Disney, currently in an ongoing partnership with Kishan for computer animated films, expressed interest in negotiating with Kishan for the Pokemon license rights. They aim to incorporate the Pokemon theme, including cafes and restaurants, along with the popular Pokemon mascots, into their Disney parks worldwide. Walt Disney didn't particularly care about Kishan's famous video game IPs, except for Pokemon. They recognized the immense potential of Pokemon and even entertained the idea of directly and fully acquiring the rights from Kishan. Rumors circulated in Hollywood, especially among circles in Beverly Hills, suggesting that Walt Disney was tempted to buy the Pokemon rights for $200 million from Kishan. While these rumors seemed crazy and exaggerated, they sparked discussions and speculations within the industry. While Walt Disney might be interested in buying Pokemon, it shouldn't reach such a ridiculous amount. The GTA 3 has been in the USA market for a few days already, and even some gangsters who played the game were impressed. The in-game character, named Claude, in Liberty City, along with the missions and the ability to freely roam around felt interesting. However, gamers have noticed that, compared to other games, GTA 3 actually stutters a little after playing for an extended period. Although Kishan made significant optimizations and compromises to run the video game with its demands in graphics and memory, it seems not to be enough. In fact, if not for the fact that the KS1 developed by Kishan is much superior to the PS1 in Shin's previous life, it would not be possible to create GTA 3 even with cuts in content. It was only made possible with Kishan developing a custom 32-bit MIPS processor with a 64-bit data bus architecture, offering a larger instruction set and faster processing for complex calculations. The GPU with doubled the clock speed and additional texture memory improved texture filtering, resolution scaling, and allowed for early polygonal rendering for simple 3D elements. With the KS1 CD-ROM having a faster transfer rate, loading times were reduced. But even with those specifications, GTA 3 was still too taxing for the hardware of KS1. Despite that, Shin felt that it was already impressive for his company to port such a PS2 game to the KS1. Chapter 314, Planning to Adapt. After the release of GTA 3, the releases of Final Fantasy V and Final Fantasy VI are also out. RPG gamers, especially in Japan, are quite excited about the latest RPG video game release. Not to mention the fact that these two are sequels to the same video game, Final Fantasy. This video game series has been quite popular, especially in Japan and some parts of Asia and the USA. The gameplay of the video game Final Fantasy is still in 2D pixelated style, which suits RPGs well. Gamers prefer playing RPGs in 2D pixelated graphics because they're more accustomed to it, and the KS1 graphics are not yet perfect. Shin looked at the sales report of the video games they've released so far, and each of the video game sales has been quite good. As for Final Fantasy V and Final Fantasy VI, they are actually selling even better than the other KS1 released video games. Shin attributes this to the fact that Final Fantasy V and Final Fantasy VI also have a cartridge version for the SKES. Also, the CD version of the video game Final Fantasy, the latest sequel in the series for KS1, had sales that were actually quite behind the other latest KS1 video games. However, the Final Fantasy latest sequels were selling quite well for SKES. The SKES gamers worldwide actually surpassed the KS1 gamers globally, even in Japan. Hence, it's not surprising that its video games would still sell quite well. While the Final Fantasy latest sequels were available on SKES, there was a noticeable difference when the video game was played on KS1. In KS1, the Final Fantasy video game graphics were much better than when played on SKES, which is only a 16-bit console. The sound quality of Final Fantasy in KS1 was also much superior to SKES, and the controls were more versatile in KS1 than in SKES. Overall, the quality of the video game Final Fantasy was significantly better for KS1 than for SKES. In Shin's previous life, the Final Fantasy US version, such as Final Fantasy III and Final Fantasy IV in Japan, was actually titled as Final Fantasy I and Final Fantasy II in the USA version. But the Final Fantasy series didn't encounter such confusion in this world. Thanks to Shin, Kishan was able to translate the entire Final Fantasy series into the USA version and the EU version. As a result, many RPG gamers in the USA didn't face the same problem Shin experienced in his previous life. Time passed, and it was finally Christmas. Shin and Myra celebrated Christmas together. After Christmas ended, in their house, the 2-year-old Shinichi was playing in the living room. "Shin, I really like this book. I recommend it to you." Myra, absorbed in reading, exclaimed to Shin, who was playing Super Smash Bros. On the prototype K64. Shin paused the video game and looked over. He asked, "Which book?" He had been busy testing the video game on the unfinished console, so he hadn't noticed what Myra was reading at the time. "It's an English book called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone." Myra then read the title of the book aloud in English. Shin, upon hearing it, wasn't really surprised by such a familiar name, as it was quite famous in his previous life. He just smiled and resumed playing the video game, saying, "Oh? That book? I've already read it, it was published by one of our company, after all." Myra, not paying much attention to the book's publishers, nodded and said, "I see. This book was just gifted to me by one of the woman executives in the company. I didn't expect it to be published by the subsidiary. And it's in English too." Shin nodded and said, "That's right. It is in English, first published in the United Kingdom. So far, it has decent sales in the country and has received a good response." "I see. I can say that it deserved it, considering the interesting concepts introduced by the book," Myra said thoughtfully, paused, and then added with a chuckle, "and to be honest, I am quite surprised that this book is considered children's literature." Shin also smiled and replied, "Well, the characters were still pretty much kids, after all." Then Shin suddenly mentioned, "I am actually thinking of making a movie adaptation of that book." Upon hearing this, Myra was genuinely surprised, yet a bit excited at the same time. She exclaimed, "Really?" Shin nodded and said with a faint smile, "Yes. If you want, we'll be the first to watch it before it's screened in cinemas." With twinkling eyes, Myra exclaimed, "Let's watch it in the home theater together." "Of course." Shin added, "The filming location will actually be in the UK. I've already prepared the Kishan Picture Film Studio there for quite some time now. Probably, the only steps remaining before the film project begins are script acquisition, script refinement, and determining the film's budget." When Myra heard all of that, she asked worriedly, "Is it really okay to plan to film a movie on a whim just because I like the book?" Pausing, she added, "What if the movie doesn't make much? Aren't you basically profiting nothing?" Although Myra had become much more relaxed in her life due to the fact that Shin had essentially become a wealthy man, she still thought in business perspectives. She didn't want to jeopardize the things that her husband had worked so hard to build. Shin smiled when he heard that and said, "Don't worry. Planning a film adaptation of the book you're reading was not just a whim of mine. I saw the potential of the book, and I could see it making enough profit. But won't making such a film adaptation cost too much due to the involvement of magic and stuff? I heard that CGI costs a lot, Myra said with furrowed brows. Don't worry too much. Don't you remember? We own a CGI company, and because of our Unreal Engine, the CGI costs have reduced a lot, Shin reassured with a smile. All right. But you really don't have to go too far for me, you know. Myra said with a warm smile. Anything for you. Shin smiled as he embraced Myra. It seemed Myra misunderstood that he was going to adapt a movie just for her, but she didn't know that the plan to adapt the film was always in place. Shin didn't mind such misunderstandings. To him, it could only mean that Myra would be more passionate in bed this time. Chapter 315, Contemplation. Kishan Pictures was still in the filming stage of Spider-Man. But while filming the superhero movie, Kishan Pictures in the UK was also evaluating and may prepare to film the recently well-known book in London literacy, and that is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. The book was actually quite well known to literacy fans in London. High school or college students, or even elementary kids in school, would read the book once in a while. One of the reasons why the book is quite well known, even to some elementary students who are literacy fans, was because of the fact that Kishan Foundation donated it to their schools. And teachers would tell the story to the kids once in a while, and because of that, the book influenced the kids quite a bit. Amidst the great popularity of Toy Story in animation and the ushering in of a new era of filmmaking, many animation studios also tried to attempt computer-generated 3D animation. Companies such as DreamWorks Animation and Blue Sky Studios. The animation studios were already expecting the time-consuming and budget demands of 3D animation films, yet a few of them, especially the two mentioned, such as DreamWorks and Blue Sky Studios, and a few more were willing to take on the risks for 3D animation. Meanwhile, Pixar, the first animation studio to delve into computer-generated 3D animation, is now utilizing the Kishan software Unreal Engine. Unbeknownst to them, Pixar played a significant role in enhancing the Unreal Engine. As Pixar animators faced specific challenges and needs in their animation workflows, they established direct communication with Kishan software developers. Through this collaboration, they conveyed issues to Kishan Unreal Engine developers, guiding feature development and improvements. Through collaboration between Pixar and Kishan companies, Pixar worked directly with Kishan engineers. They provided feedback, tested new tools, and suggested enhancements based on their real-world experience. Pixar also contributed to educational materials, tutorials, and documentation, fostering a broader understanding of Unreal Engine for animation. However, it wasn't only Pixar providing assistance in the improvement of Unreal Engine, Microsoft also played a significant role in contributing to these advancements. So far, only a select few companies like Pixar and Microsoft have been granted full access to the Unreal Engine. Other studios, whether in the video game or animation industry, upon learning about the capabilities of this software used by Pixar and Microsoft, expressed their eagerness to utilize it, even willing to pay a substantial price for access. Shin recently received a report from Oreo Masayoshi highlighting the strong desire among various animation studios and influential film studios in Hollywood to also adopt Kishan's Unreal Engine, the same software employed by Pixar and Microsoft. While Kishan aimed to preserve the exclusivity of the Unreal Engine to retain control over its direction and quality, Shin recognized that exclusivity might restrict the engine's impact and growth. Competing solutions could emerge over time from other companies. Despite the broader access of the AVG engine aiding in the improvement of the Unreal Engine software, Shin noted that the AVG engine was predominantly utilized by video game companies. Consequently, the animation features didn't progress as much as those in the Unreal Engine. Despite the ongoing improvements in both the VG Engine and Unreal Engine with the help of the data from VG Engine, the enhancements in the Unreal Engine stemming from collaborations with Pixar and Microsoft were exclusive to the Unreal Engine. This was because the direct agreements through partnerships with Pixar and Microsoft only pertained to the improvements of the Unreal Engine and did not encompass enhancements for the VG Engine. Shin could potentially lift the exclusivity of the Unreal Engine at Kishan, offering broader access to companies and developers. However, the dilemma lies in the possible repercussions, particularly in alienating Pixar and Microsoft. While alienating Pixar wasn't a concern for Shin, given his significant ownership stake of 24% in the company, the prospect of alienating Microsoft prompted Shin to contemplate further. The reason for potential alienation is clear. Opening up the Unreal Engine to other companies would diminish the unique advantages currently enjoyed by Pixar and Microsoft in the market. The software plays a pivotal role in propelling them ahead in CGI, animations, and various other aspects compared to companies using the VG engine. Kishan weighed the pros and cons of maintaining exclusivity for the Unreal Engine. The advantages included Kishan retaining exclusive access to advanced features developed in collaboration with Pixar and Microsoft, providing a potential competitive edge. There was also less risk of alienating current partners like Pixar and Microsoft. However, the drawbacks of maintaining exclusivity were apparent. It limited the reach and potential revenue of the Unreal Engine by excluding most studios, potentially generating negative PR or antitrust concerns. There was also the risk of missing out on potential advancements from a wider pool of users and developers. On the other hand, opening the Unreal Engine software to wider access, even to the public, presented its own set of pros and cons. The benefits included increased revenue and market share through licensing fees and wider adoption, a broader developer community contributing to its development, and an improved public image by promoting open access and collaboration. Yet, the drawbacks included the possibility that studios using advanced features developed with Pixar and Microsoft might feel they've lost their competitive advantage. Maintaining separate code bases for advanced and basic versions of the Unreal Engine could be resource-intensive, and there was a risk of competitors using it to create better games or animated films, challenging Kishan's market position. Chapter 316, Gaming Reflections, Kishan's Perspective on the Video Game Industry. In the USA, New York, Oreo Masayoshi met with representatives of animation studios such as DreamWorks, Blue Sky Studios, and even the Walt Disney representative. Oreo Masayoshi attended and entertained the guests in the Kishan building, in his office. The reason for the appearance of animation studio representatives in his office was because of the Kishan software Unreal Engine. Regarding such matters, Oreo Masayoshi has direct contact with the young boss, Shinro Suzuki, and he meticulously read the documents sent to him by the young boss the other night. With his trusted people, such as the secretary, he will handle the deal today in his office. The animation studios are willing to spend a lot of money just to use the software exclusively utilized by Pixar and Microsoft, and by some subsidiary companies under Kishan. To be honest, Oreo Masayoshi would have agreed with the animation studios if he had control over the deal and interests, but the Kishan founder will still be the one to decide regarding the matter. Meanwhile, when Oreo Masayoshi and his team provided the offer of the basic Unreal Engine software, most of the animation studio representatives had contemplating expressions, but deep inside, they felt pretty excited that Kishan was actually willing to offer them to use the Unreal Engine, although they still didn't completely know what the Unreal Engine Basic was. When Oreo Masayoshi and his team provided the papers to the animation studio representatives regarding the Unreal Engine Basic, only after reading the documents did the animation studios have clear ideas of what the Unreal Engine Basic was. It was basically the basic version of the advanced Unreal Engine being used by Pixar and Microsoft and by some Kishan subsidiary companies. Basically, the Unreal Engine Basic, as the basic word just beside the software name, it was pretty obvious that it was indeed a lesser version. Although it was indeed the case, the animation studio representatives still consider it, as inputted in the papers, that most of the functions related to 3D animation were available in the basic version, and the software being used by Pixar only held a quite small advantage. The negotiations then paused for a while as the animation studio representatives still had to go and talk to the higher UPS of their companies. Oreo Masayoshi simply nodded and saw the animation studio representatives out. After that, Oreo Masayoshi sighed in relief. To be honest, there were still some computer software companies that wanted to use the software. IBM, Sun Microsystems, Oracle. These software companies were also willing to partner with Kishan regarding the development of the Unreal Engine software. It made Oreo Masayoshi feel a bit helpless as all of those companies were quite well known in the computer industry, especially IBM. Although IBM is not as dominant as before, it still holds influence in the computer industry. While Kishan responded neutrally to these software companies, they still requested to use the software at least. Especially Oracle, in 1995, as 3D modeling and visualization gained traction in various industries like architecture, engineering, and product design, Oracle could see Unreal Engine as a tool for creating immersive 3D simulations or integrating it with their database software for data visualization and presentation. Then there was a company named Adobe Systems. Adobe Systems received information about an advanced software exclusively used by Pixar, Microsoft, and Kishan CGI companies, and they also became interested in the software. Adobe Systems, known for creative tools like Photoshop and Illustrator, was quite intrigued by Unreal Engine's real-time rendering capabilities. They wanted to collaborate with Kishan to create integrated workflows between their products and the engine, allowing designers and artists to seamlessly transfer 2D assets and animations into 3D environments. Adobe Systems actually licensed Photoshop, initially exclusive to Apple Macintosh, but as time passed, the Adobe chief architect ported Photoshop to the Microsoft operating system. Consequently, Photoshop reached a wider audience, and the product became much more successful. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, Minato, Japan, at the Kishan Rules headquarters, Shin has already informed the CEO of Microsoft, Will Gates, about his intention to provide other companies with a basic version of the Unreal Engine software. Will Gates talked to him on the phone for quite a while before responding to Shin that he would discuss with the executives of Microsoft before requesting concessions from Kishan. Will Gates knew that Microsoft has a little role in the ownership of the Unreal Engine software, and the decision depends on Kishan's overall strategy, risk tolerance, and long-term vision. After that, Shin also contacted Pixar and informed them of providing the Unreal Engine basic version to other companies, and whether Pixar would have concessions regarding the matter. Following that, Shin relaxed in his soft office chair. He then examined the progress report of the 128-bit console. The research on the 64-bit console was progressing well, and simultaneously, due to the advancements made with the 64-bit game console, the research and development efforts behind it served as a crucial stepping stone for the next generation of 128-bit game console systems. With semiconductor technologies from Samstar Technologies, the research needed for the CPU, GPU, and sound chips for the 128-bit game console. To be honest, considering the progress in the research of the 128-bit console, Kishan may have already made significant strides due to technological advancements and the assistance of partnerships with other tech companies. Shin was contemplating skipping the K64 and potentially releasing the KS2. Although researching the K64 might seem like a financial waste if not released, the research on the K64 64-bit system significantly contributed to the development of the KS2 128-bit system. Not to mention, Shin just received a report from Intel that Toru Suzuki was leading research towards the 128-bit game console. Since the 128-bit system would have more capabilities for running 3D, the joint research between the two companies was already progressing towards the 128-bit system. Shin doesn't really mind if Toru Suzuki completes their research on the 128-bit system earlier than him. This is because Kishan doesn't make much profit from the console itself. Instead, Kishan profits from video games, whether they are Kishan's own or from other companies. The royalty fees from using the VG engine and the fees for Kishan providing the video game toolkit contribute significantly. Even if Kishan were to stop releasing video games, they would still profit immensely from Toru Suzuki and other video game entertainment companies. Shin is actually cheering for Toru Suzuki deep inside to finish their 128-bit system just after Kishan completes the 128-bit system video game console. With that, for example, when Kishan is about to release the latest console, competitors can release their own latest console. With different strengths and focuses, each console may attract different segments of the target audience, further expanding the market. The video game industry will develop further, instead of Kishan dominating everyone. With Kishan's strength, it might not achieve the same satisfying expansion results as with healthy competition. Even competing consoles can sometimes influence each other in terms of adopted technologies and development practices. For instance, if both consoles incorporate similar controller features or game development tools, it can standardize these elements across the industry, simplifying development and creating a more unified experience for players. Each console's strengths and weaknesses can serve as benchmarks for the other, aiding in assessing their own successes and identifying areas for improvement. This can accelerate the overall development of the industry, pushing both companies to strive for constant improvement. With these thoughts in mind, Shin decided to directly skip the K64. Since the KS1 was still being spread out in the market, releasing a new game console just after 1 or 2 years wouldn't be a good idea. Not only would it not help the business, but it would also hurt it. The remaining stocks of KS1 might not even sell with the new one in the market. While it worked with the SKS1 and managed to get ahead of Toru Suzuki in terms of shares in the video game industry, as Kishan was still quite ahead of Toru Suzuki, there was no need at all to release another console. Even Toru and Suzuki were forced to release a 32-bit console because of Kishan. Now, their 16-bit console stocks just piled up and only sell at a cheap price. That's the reason why the boards of directors of each company couldn't help but want to give up on the video game industry. Chapter 317, Another Industry. After a few days since Shin informed Microsoft and Pixar, the two companies contacted Kishan regarding their concessions. Microsoft seeks concessions like preferential pricing for their internal studios, early access to new features, or even potential collaboration on future game development projects involving Unreal Engine. While Pixar demands continued exclusivity for some of their advanced features, preferential support and technical assistance, or even a revenue share based on the success of movies leveraging those features. Kishan agreed with some of their concessions, which at least relieved Pixar and Microsoft. And with that, a few weeks later, the Unreal Engine Basic was still in negotiations with the animation studios and the software companies. Although the animation studios and software companies weren't complaining much, the fact that they're only able to use the basic version of Unreal Engine was at least a year or so behind the advanced version utilized by Pixar and Microsoft, and especially by Kishan, still disappointed them a little. But still, they weren't as dissatisfied either, due to the fact that the basic version of Unreal Engine has been developed quite well and been solidified compared to the advanced version of Unreal Engine. Since it has been improved monthly, there are at least bugs due to code complexity, such as adding new features and modifications without thorough testing can introduce unintended consequences and break existing functionality, and data quality. The quality of data used to drive updates is crucial. Errors or inconsistencies in data can lead to unexpected bugs and erroneous behavior. Updates might conflict with existing projects or hardware configurations, causing compatibility issues. Ensuring new updates don't reintroduce previously fixed bugs requires extensive regression testing, which can be time-consuming. That's what is stated in the papers Kishan provided to them, but what they didn't know was that, while there are indeed bugs in the advanced version of Unreal Engine, Kishan implemented a separate testing environment in the game engine software. Testing in a separate environment isolates potential issues, preventing them from affecting the advanced Unreal Engine officially used and disrupting ongoing projects. Bugs can be identified and fixed before they reach the official advanced version, minimizing the impact on production. The separate testing environment also provides a safe space to experiment with new features and evaluate their effectiveness without compromising the stability of the main engine. Through feedback recollection from testers, features can be refined, and any usability concerns addressed before updates to the advanced version. Of course, all of this will not be known by the animation studios and software companies. So far, they are just quite satisfied with the experience and the chance to use the Unreal Engine software, even if it's a basic version. Meanwhile, in Microsoft headquarters, after receiving information that Kishan provided the use of the basic version of Unreal Engine to other companies, Will Gates felt a bit uncomfortable. Quite so far, while the Unreal Engine of Kishan has been assisting Microsoft in developing video games, he also felt a bit of vigilance. The owner of such advanced software was Kishan, after all, another company not under Microsoft's control. That's why, even before when Kishan wanted to make the Unreal Engine available to other companies, Will Gates had actually been contemplating developing Microsoft's own software. Because he knew that Microsoft didn't have much leverage in the advanced software of Kishan. They're just mere partners. But, at the same time, due to Microsoft partnering with Kishan's Unreal Engine, Microsoft was somewhat inspired by the Kishan software. However, developing such software would prove to be quite time-consuming. And Will Gates could potentially offend Kishan, which currently owned shares in Microsoft, by having Microsoft develop its own engine software. But Will Gates needs to be clear in his stance. Although Kishan owned about 5% of Microsoft, he still needed to think about Microsoft's future. Microsoft is currently the number one in the operating system in the computer industry, and the useful computer applications of Microsoft are also quite profitable. Although Will Gates has some admiration yet vigilance against Kishan, it doesn't mean he is afraid of them. Will Gates wasn't exactly sure about the current net worth of Kishan, as it was undisclosed and it was a private company, but Will Gates was sure that Microsoft was still ahead of Kishan in terms of net worth and experience in software development. Although Will Gates has to admit that the Kishan Unreal Engine is quite wonderful, it doesn't mean Microsoft can't do the same as Kishan. Meanwhile, Shin didn't know that Will Gates had some thoughts and ideas, but even if Shin knew Will Gates had been contemplating making their own engine software, it wouldn't really matter. Kishan has already gathered months upon months of data and feedback from other companies to enhance their Unreal Engine software. Additionally, the Unreal Engine has started to exert its influence in the computer industry, with companies flocking to use it, further enhancing the software. While other software companies contemplate drawing inspiration from the Unreal Engine, even in its basic version, it remains insufficient to rival Kishan's Unreal Engine. Not today, not in the future. Shin was assured of that. As long as Shin continues to live his life, the Unreal Engine will continuously improve. In the meantime, Shin was actually pondering the car motor industry. After playing racing car video games created by other entertainment companies, Shin observed various designs and models directly collaborated with car companies. For instance, Suzuki released a 32-bit racing video game just after the end of December, featuring Suzuki car models for players to use. It appeared that Shin's family's company, Suzuki, aimed to advertise their car models through the racing video game, an ingenious idea. Suzuki seemed to invest more effort in creating the racing car video game named Racers Ultimate Speed than their other games. In fact, it even surpassed the need for speed in graphics and car choices. From this, Suzuki's intention became clear: they wanted their cars promoted in the racing video game while still profiting from its sales. Upon realizing this, Shin genuinely considered acquiring a car motor company. If he could release a racing video game like Gran Turismo or Need for Speed, he could effectively promote his company's cars in the game, creating a mutually beneficial relationship. Although the idea was fantastic, Shin knew entering such an unfamiliar industry would be quite challenging. Speaking of cars, the film The Fast and the Furious would undoubtedly aid in promoting cars, extending its influence to video games as well. Chapter 318, Considerations. Shin looked at the car pictures on the computer. They included cars like Land Rover, Jaguar, Porsche, and so on. To be honest, acquiring at least one motor company from this list of car manufacturers would cost several $billion. Shin then recalled that Ford acquired Land Rover for less than $3 billion in the year 2000. In 1995, Land Rover was still in a relatively good financial and strategic position, despite facing some challenges. The same could be said for other luxurious car companies. Land Rover and Jaguar cars were later acquired by an Indian company, Tata Motors, for $2.3 billion from Ford in 2008. During that time, the global financial crisis peaked, affecting many companies, including Ford. This led Ford to focus on its core brands. Land Rover and Jaguar cars, while iconic, were considered non-core, and their profitability fluctuated, making them more vulnerable to divestment. Thinking about it, Shin considered Tesla, which Elon Musk bought for about $6 million. Well, I should consider this more, Shin thoughtfully said as he stroked his chin. Maybe Shin could wait until the 2000s and then acquire Tesla, as well as brands like Land Rover and Jaguar cars in 2008. Meanwhile, Kishan was about to finish the Game Boy Advance. Its design was a flip and kind of the same as the SP version in Shin's previous life. While the design resembled the SP version, it was still notably inferior to Shin's previous life. However, considering that the Game Boy Advance SP in Shin's previous life began research around the year 2000 and was released in 2003, it was understandable. As time passed, in the year 1996, around January, Pokémon Green became available for Game Boy in Japan. It quickly became a sensation in Japan upon its initial release. Pokémon and Game Boy fans had been eagerly awaiting another Pokémon video game for some time. They didn't mind if the gameplay and storyline resembled previous Pokémon games, their main concern was the introduction of new Pokémon to catch. Some foreign Pokémon fans in Japan were surprised to see that Pokémon video games had different versions in various colors, unlike the USA and Europe versions where Pokémon Red and Blue were on the same cartridge. Beyond the Pokémon video games was the Pokémon trading card. With Kishan merchandise, millions of Pokémon were manufactured and released worldwide. In fact, after its success in Asia in 1993 alone, the Pokémon trading card earned around $278 million in the USA in its first year. In certain parts of Asia, including Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Japan, South Korea, and various countries in Southeast Asia, the Pokémon Trading Card Company, a subsidiary of Kishan, in collaboration with Nintendo and distributed through Kishan merchandise stores, earned approximately $310 million in its first year, which was 1994. Around 1994, the Kishan and Pokémon series also began exerting their influence directly in South Asia. This included several countries in the Indian subcontinent such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and notably, India. While Kishan products had been distributed in these countries through local retailers, Kishan didn't have a strong presence there compared to the USA and some parts of Asia. The weak presence, limited local representation, communication channels, and engagement in South Asia created a distance between Kishan and its potential audience. This lack of visibility hindered brand recognition and trust. However, Kishan is gradually establishing its presence, entering these countries by establishing branch companies, communities, and even licensing Pokemon anime rights to certain TV channels at a favorable price. The South Asian market has become a significant target for Kishan due to its vast, large, and growing potential. Compared to established markets like North America and Europe, South Asia remains relatively untapped in terms of video game consumption. The young population and increasing disposable income in South Asia provide an untapped audience for Kishan's games. Early entry into this market could lead to long-term brand loyalty and a solid customer base. From an economic standpoint, South Asia offers a talented and cost-effective workforce for game development and localization. This potential allows Kishan to reduce production costs and reach a broader audience at a lower price point. Moreover, in the year 1994, South Asia already had a developing IT sector with skilled programmers. Kishan could explore opportunities to establish development studios or partnerships in the region for cost-effective production and a better understanding of the local culture. However, since 1994, Kishan foresaw challenges upon entering the South Asian market directly. The region is diverse, featuring multiple languages, cultures, and economic disparities. Kishan recognized the need to tailor its strategy and offerings to specific sub-regions and markets. Moreover, during the 1994 period, video game piracy was rampant in South Asia. Nevertheless, this wasn't a significant issue due to Kishan's robust anti-piracy measures and its provision of affordable pricing for the SKES and video games, effectively combating this problem. As Kishan gradually entered the South Asian market, the Pokemon franchise had already gained substantial recognition. Consequently, the Pokemon trading card alone generated approximately $300 million in profits in that region by the end of 1995. The Pokemon franchise, whether in video games or beyond, experienced significant profits in South Asia, a trend that extended to Lego as well. Lego gained popularity in South Asia, particularly in India, becoming a favorite among kids. However, the imported price made it less affordable for the masses. Anticipating this, Shin invested substantially in establishing factories and a workforce for Kishan merchandise toys, including Lego, aiming to reduce import duties and material sourcing. Sourcing raw materials within India further lowered production costs compared to relying on imports. Kishan executives supported the idea, considering the benefits of lower labor costs and an improved distribution network. Establishing factories in India not only reduced costs but also facilitated a more efficient distribution network, reaching smaller towns and villages beyond major cities, thereby expanding the market and boosting sales. While this was in progress, factories for Kishan game consoles and video games were planned for the future. Board games, toys, and cards became a major focus, emerging as one of Kishan's most profitable ventures alongside video games. Interestingly, Kishan's profits in the video game sector wouldn't match those from toys and cards if not for the introduction of the SKES and KS1 consoles. Opening the platform for these consoles allowed Kishan to profit from collected royalty fees, with the addition of VG Engine royalty fees further enhancing profits in the video game sector. Chapter 319, Nostalgia. Time passed in 1996, and it was finally March. Quite so far, the video games industry in the video game capital, Japan, has been doing quite well. KS1 reached 9.4 million in sales in Japan after its release in the country for more than a year. And the estimation of about 20 to 30 million units of KS1 being sold worldwide. Well, except in China, where Kishan couldn't sell its products, Kishan has been doing quite well. Even though Kishan has lost its direct presence in South Korea, Samstar is distributing their products in the market. From Shin's perspective, it was already quite satisfying results. After all, the PS1 in his previous life didn't achieve such a result. Shin contributed it to the fact that the people of this world didn't really experience much video games for decades after Kishan developed a video game in an 8-bit console, KES. And then Tora and Suzuki also helped in introducing the video games for 16-bit consoles in the foreign market. As a result, the new era of video games reached a wider audience worldwide. And also, with the new console of Tora Suzuki, the TSX Fusion, after its release in the USA, Europe, and some parts of Asia, after months of its release in Japan, also reached a more potential audience. With another console other than Kishan, it gave the market more options, making the video game industry expand even more. While the KS1 achieved a good result in sales worldwide, the TSX Fusion sales worldwide weren't so bad too. In fact, the sales of TSX Fusion after its several months of its release were much better than PS1 in Shin's previous life. Maybe because of its lower price of the console compared to KS1, it had decent sales. In the meantime, Kishan developed various entertainment in the arcade section, experiencing a genre explosion, including fighting games other than Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. Kishan, not content with the existing fighting games, released another arcade game named Tekken. Although not yet available for KS1, the arcade machine hardware could handle better graphics and gameplay than KS1. The genre explosion also featured rhythm games like Dance Dance Revolution, newly available in arcade sections across several stores and malls, especially in Tokyo. The popularity of racing games also surged. In Toshima Ward, Tokyo, Japan. Shin visited the Ikeburo Center in Toshima Ward with Myra. They kept a low profile, with Shin donning a casual jacket from Kishan merchandise, sunglasses, and a baseball cap. Despite Shin's considerable fame in Japan, particularly within the gaming community, it didn't guarantee casual recognition everywhere in Japan. His casual style, with sunglasses and a baseball cap, made him recognizable only to those familiar with him. Myra wore a pink Kishan jacket and the same baseball cap as Shin. While she didn't wear sunglasses like Shin, their clothes seemed to be a couple's edition, especially since Shin's jacket was blue. So many things have changed after just a few years. Myra said to Shin after they visited the Ikeburo Entertainment Center. The place appeared more bustling, with posters related to video games prominently grabbing people's attention. The posters also advertised the latest arcade machines from Kishan and Tora Suzuki. Shin nodded and replied, "Indeed. I'm sure the arcade here must have changed a lot too. Yet, unlike before when the arcade only offered entertainment like Gasapon and Claw Crane games, now there are video games serving as entertainment in arcades." Myra nodded thoughtfully. Shin agreed with a nod, and they headed to the arcade. As expected, the arcade section in Ikeburo was lively, filled with various people engaging in conversations and enjoying different games. The place was contrary to the typical quiet Japanese atmosphere. Instead, it was quite loud, yet the people there didn't seem to mind. "Whoa, the place is quite lively." Shin adjusted his glasses and said with a smile. "The youth in the country really have changed, hey." Myra couldn't help but sigh a little. Indeed, the youth who frequented arcades in Japan mostly had different fashion and behavior compared to the 80s. A style that gained popularity these days was the so-called Harajuku style, infamous in Japan. Alongside this style, there was also the Guru style. These two fashion trends, as well as many subgroups in Japanese fashion, were born out of the youth's desire to break away from tradition and monotony. After hearing Myra's sigh and words, Shin just laughed and said, "It's not really a bad thing. We can see that the country is gradually moving away from the idea of being a nation built on tradition and monotony. With these kinds of styles, our country will be much more colorful and vibrant." Upon hearing Shin's words, Myra nodded, albeit reluctantly, silently worrying for her Shinichi. While Myra was lost in thought, she felt Shin's hand holding hers. She turned her eyes to Shin, who held her hand, and he led her to play in the arcade after all. That was the reason they came here. This was Shin and Myra's date, and Myra felt like she was back in high school, her blood rushing with excitement. Some young people in the arcade glanced at Shin and Myra, and a few felt envious. They used to go to arcades to avoid couples in parks or schools, but now they noticed that couples were also starting to frequent arcades. This shift was partly due to the popularity of Dance Dance Revolution among young couples. Indeed, Shin and Myra played Dance Dance Revolution together, intimately learning the steps together and attracting some attention from other gamers in the arcade. Whether they were boys or girls, they felt envy, but they silently ignored it, completely unaware that the couple playing Dance Dance Revolution were the people they admired in the gaming community. Chapter 320, Conflict. After Shin and Myra played on the Dance Dance Revolution, they played a bit more in the arcade before they went home. A lot has really changed in Japan, the youth having fashion that's different from the traditional and conservative Japanese, and some of the old people felt that it was because of video games and anime influence that the youth started to change, still didn't see the fact that it was because of the society in Japan, with older generation has more say, that the youth started to develop a sense of style and rebellion. Yet those older people were kind of right that video games and anime did indeed influence the fashion style of the youth in Japan, because of the Harajuku style is not really a specific style, but some dressed the same clothes from a specific anime character or video game character, and the clothing, dresses that was wear by these youth were actually bought from Kishan merchandise. Kishan merchandise was actually just created to merchandise Kishan's video games and anime, like action figures, toys, stuffed toys, and also Lego with the design of video game or anime franchise, but the Kishan merchandise clothes gradually became a fashion style to the most of the youth. And Kishan merchandise actually became a recognizable brand in terms of fashion in Japan. Tokyo Big Sight just opened in April 1, 1996, and in April 5, 1996, Suzuki announced that they'll host a launch event at the Space Exhibition Hall of Tokyo Big Sight. And the other video game entertainment companies were also invited by Suzuki, and the Suzuki event also announced in public press conference, media coverage. It seems like the Suzuki Electronics was about to launch something, and it was related to the video games sector. But the people that's familiar with the video game industry, was kind of confused as for why Tora are not with Suzuki in the launching event. Then only after a few days did they know that the Tora and Suzuki have gotten itself into disagreements. As a result, the alliance between the two companies in terms of video game sector, seemed to near its end. That's the speculation, and when the media inquired of the situation with Tora, the Tora Electronics didn't give their comments about the matter. In Kishan Rule's headquarters, Shin just watched the press conference of Suzuki Electronics in television, and the launch product event that they'll announce in Tokyo Big Sight, a building that was just recently opened. It seems the Suzuki Electronics will be the first to use the building exhibition hall. And as for why Tora didn't join Suzuki in the launching event, people assumed it was because the Suzuki Electronics will release a video game product that was independent to Tora, and Tora doesn't have an influence to the product that Suzuki was about to launch, and it's outside their alliance, and this assumption seems to convince many people that's doubting the alliance of Tora-Suzuki. But Shin knew that it was nothing like that. Because Shin just received an intel that Tora and Suzuki really indeed come into disagreements, and one of the reasons why the two companies have come into disagreement was the latest product profit sharing. That's right, the latest product that Suzuki was about to launch was actually the reason for the disagreement, and it was the profit sharing and also a few other unknown reasons. And Shin knew that the latest product of Suzuki was a handheld video game console, and that handheld was researched along with Tora, but instead of Tora and Suzuki launching the product together, the two companies decided to separately launch the handheld video game console. So each of them could gain their own profit, but at the same time, in terms of the handheld video game console, the Tora and Suzuki will compete against each other, although their alliance between the two was still intact. It seems that the Tora and Suzuki was in conflicts whoever have contributed the most in researching the handheld, with disputes over how profits from the new handheld would be divided. This led to accusations of unfairness and resentment. Before the two companies have come into an agreement of releasing each their own handheld, and since the handheld designs wasn't yet finalized at that time, each company adapted the base framework intro their own unique system. The conflicts between Tora and Suzuki seems to be a long time ago, a few months back, but the alliance between the two companies was still in place, and Tora and Suzuki seems to still agree between the other in other things such as the video game console. And the reason why they agreed in releasing each and their own handheld was because Tora and Suzuki thought that Kishan will not release a handheld video game console anytime soon, and Tora and Suzuki thought that they could compete between the other without the worry of Kishan suddenly releasing its own handheld video game console. As soon as Shin finished thinking along the lines, he couldn't help but smiled slightly. After all, coincidentally, Kishan will also release the latest Game Boy series handheld video game console, and it was the Game Boy Advance, a flipping Game Boy and colorful yet adjustable bright screen. The LCD of Game Boy Advance was front-lit TFT LCD. And Kishan was helped by quite a lot in LCD research by Samstar, the company that was pretty much have the technology experience in the LCD technology, and because of that, Kishan was able to complete the LCD that is just right for their handheld. In fact, Samstar was really a great help beside the LCD of Game Boy Advance. They also helped Kishan in research of the processor for Game Boy Advance. Although Kishan was already developing the processor for quite a long time, Samstar research assistants, as Samstar are also experienced processor research, Kishan research and developing the processor for Game Boy Advance was quickened. It was the custom ARM CPU for their Game Boy Advance, and Samstar also assisted in developing a battery for Game Boy Advance. Also the sound chip was better. And beyond the development of the Game Boy Advance, Kishan was also able to advance in researching the LCD and touchscreen technology with the joint research of Samstar. Kishan has actually been researching LCD and touchscreen technologies in 1992, as Shin knew the importance of LCD and touchscreen later, for mobile phone technology, and Shin spent a lot of effort and budget in research of the technology. Kishan also filed patents in LCD-related technologies and also some of the touchscreen technologies and design. But Kishan wasn't the only one researching these technologies, there's competition, and other companies also patented LCD and touchscreen related technologies. And the companies that's researching and patenting technologies was those decades tech and electronics companies, and that includes Samstar. And with Samstar has been researching in LCD and touchscreen technologies in 80s to now 1996, partnering with Samstar wasn't a bad decision of Kishan, as Samstar is really such a great help in the research. Chapter 321, Big Shots. In Tokyo, Japan, on April 8, 1996, Suzuki was about to host a launching event in the exhibition hall of Tokyo Big Sight. In fact, Suzuki didn't only rent the exhibition hall but also the other space for other companies to exhibit their products. Suzuki also invited the Kishan company and its chairman, Shinro Suzuki. Shinro Suzuki was personally invited by his brothers in the press conference, and media and newspapers talked about it. Almost many people in Japan, as long as they're not living in a cave or a hermit that disconnects themselves from the world, know that the Kishan chairman, Shinro Suzuki, is the son of the current chairman of the Suzuki Group. Shinro Suzuki's other brothers are still working in the Suzuki Group, and various magazines or newspapers released an issue of the Kishan founder and chairman, Shinro Suzuki, having a bad relationship with his brothers. The topics and rumors started after Shinro Suzuki became known as the Suzuki youngest prince, and these rumors became more wild after Shinro Suzuki was covered and interviewed by Forbes. The title Suzuki youngest prince didn't sound presumptuous, since the wealthy Suzuki family offspring, the children of the current Suzuki chairman, actually have the blood of the royal family of Japan. As the mother of Shinro Suzuki and the wife of the current chairman of the Suzuki Group is actually of royal blood. That's right, Eri Suzuki indeed came from the Japanese royal family, and that's one of the main reasons why Sazuma wanted Shiro to marry Eri. And with that, the royal family actually contributed a little to the rise of the Suzuki Group as a company. Because of the marriage between Shiro and Eri, the royal family can be said to be now related to the Suzuki family. Now, with Shiko Suzuki personally and publicly inviting Shinro Suzuki during the press conference, many people were left to speculate about this gesture of Shiko Suzuki. Whether the invitation had good or bad intentions, they're subjects of speculation. In the Kishan headquarters. Will you attend? Myra asked Shin in the office after watching Suzuki's press conference. Shiko Suzuki's personal and public invitation during the press conference was attention-grabbing. Considering Shin's already established reputation and influence in Japan, it was no surprise that it would gain attention. Well, it doesn't sound bad, does it? Shin said with a smile. He paused, then added with a laugh, I guess my two older brothers wanted to show off their latest handheld. It seems they're pretty confident in their handheld, hey. Myra chuckled, recalling that Kishan had also finished their latest handheld, the Game Boy Advance. On April 9, 1996, the Suzuki launching event finally took place at Tokyo Big Sight. Many companies were present to promote their products, with crowds gathering, and even a vendor selling toriyaki and other food stalls. Media outlets were also present for coverage, and gradually, well-known figures in the business world arrived, such as the elder son of Tora chairman, Idori Tanaka. Then there's Masayoshi Son, arriving at Tokyo Big Sight. The Suzuki Electronics event was quite high-profile, complete with a red carpet to welcome wealthy individuals like Masayoshi Son, the founder and CEO of SoftBank, a telecom giant primarily offering telecommunication services in Japan, including fixed-line and mobile phone services. SoftBank also challenged the monopoly of NTT. Personally invited by the Suzuki brothers, Masayoshi Son agreed, understanding their intention. They sought his support and investment in the development of their video game sector. While Masayoshi Son recognized the potential of video games, he viewed entering and investing in such an industry, especially with a tough competitor like Kishan, as carrying significant risk. If the risk were low and the profit immense, he would likely dive in, much like how he recognized the potential of the internet and invested substantially in it. He even formed a joint venture with Yahoo! Japan. Masayoshi Son wouldn't have accepted the invitation if not for the fact that the Suzuki Group wielded considerable influence in the business world. Additionally, his daughters had grown fond of video games, especially Pokémon, adding a personal touch to his decision. Then there was the CEO of NEC, Shigeo Miyachi. As a major electronics manufacturer, Suzuki invited him so Ctto could discuss possible support for the development of Suzuki's video game sector. Given NEC's technical expertise in chip design and display technology, Ctto believed that with NEC's support and investment, future handhelds or video game consoles would exhibit better quality and improvements. Hideo Takanaka, the Minister of Financial Services, was also present. His inclusion signaled Suzuki Electronics' commitment to economic responsibility and transparency. Suzuki Electronics aimed to attract investors and boost public confidence. Additionally, the governor of the Bank of Japan attended. His presence held the potential to secure favorable loan terms or investment opportunities, providing crucial financial backing for Suzuki Electronics' ambitious endeavors. Those knowledgeable about the business world were quite surprised by the presence of these influential individuals at just the launching event of Suzuki Electronics. It's reminiscent of when the Kishan founder revealed himself to the world for the first time. However, unlike that occasion, only a few well-known business individuals participated, such as the chairman of Tora Corporation, the president of Tora Electronics, and the chairman of the Suzuki Group, and CEO of Suzuki Electronics. Besides them, there weren't many influential and wealthy individuals from the business world at the Kishan conference. Contrastingly, at this Suzuki launching event, while the chairman of Tora and chairman of Suzuki Group were absent, those who arrived so far were either influential in business or politics. They were escorted to the VIP room where the elites gathered, with the Suzuki brothers entertaining them. This alone suggests that Suzuki Electronics is seeking support. Then, the crowd outside Tokyo Big Sight almost caused a commotion when Shinro Suzuki arrived. As the participants in the launching event were mostly video game fans, they were excited to see the father of video games arrive. Shin was a bit surprised by the cheers of the crowd, but fortunately, his menacing bodyguards prevented any disturbances. However, the crowd seemed undeterred by the bodyguards' looks as they attempted to lay their hands on Shin. Fortunately, stanchions and velvet ropes, along with people blocking the advances of the crowd, prevented any untoward incidents. Damn! Am I this famous already? Shin, however, felt a bit astonished and complicated inside. He didn't expect people, especially the Japanese, to want to touch him with expressions seemingly desiring to rip his clothes and see him naked. Chapter 322, Intention. After Shin entered, he was escorted to the VIPs, and there, Shin saw his brothers looking at him, but didn't really greet him. Shin didn't really mind, and then he saw that the other influential business individuals seemed to recognize him and approached him. Shin conversed with them, and Shin felt that most of the individuals that approached him have the intention to build a connection with him, the chairman of Kishan, and Shin didn't really mind. It's just like making friends in high school, but on a corporate level, and of course, more professional. And also, connections may come in handy in the future for Shin and Kishan. But some of the individuals actually just wanted to invest in his company, and Shin will hear their words as if it was kind-hearted advice. If you need help in any way, and especially if it relates to money, just call me. This is my business card. Or something along those lines. Well, their intentions were clear to Shin, or some of these individuals really made it known their intention to Shin. Basically, if Kishan needed funds, or money, Shin could just contact them and let them help him by investing in his company, and therefore, they would fund his company and make up for the lack of money Kishan is experiencing. Shin just accepted those individuals' contact card, but Shin will make sure he'll make his company even bigger and richer, and there will be no time that he'll really need their investment and contact those people's contact cards. The individuals who wanted to invest in Kishan were the people that always wanted to invest in Kishan but couldn't since Kishan is unlisted in a private company. But these individuals were not really too aware of Kishan or Shin's net worth, although they knew the estimation, they still clearly underestimated him in their estimation. Then Shin saw a man in his 30s, approaching him, and then after the man introduced himself, Shin then got to know that the man was Masayoshi Son, the founder and CEO of SoftBank. Shin conversed with him calmly, but deep inside, he was quite thoughtful. After all, the man that talked to him was also quite well known in his previous life. And one of the billionaires of Japan, if his memories served him right. While they were discussing and sitting at tables, the CEO of Suzuki Electronics came onto the stage and introduced himself as Nico Tabata. He then presented the products they planned to launch this year. The first one was a hi-fi stereo system. Suzuki continued to dominate the hi-fi audio market with their range of CD players, cassette decks, and amplifiers, known for their sleek design and high-fidelity sound. Following that was a rice cooker. The rice cooker was made more convenient for cooking rice, the Japanese were quite serious about their rice cooker technologies. Next, there was the Handycam. The lightweight and compact Handycam camcorders made video recording more accessible and user-friendly, becoming a popular choice for families and everyday life documentation. Then there was the digital camera. While still limited in resolution and storage compared to future digital cameras, the digital camera marked an early stepping stone towards the digital photography revolution that Suzuki would later spearhead. Finally, there was the handheld video game console. Everyone was quite surprised to see the handheld. Shin looked and saw that the handheld was rectangular, and although it looked extremely blocky, the edges were curved, and the controls were on the sides of the screen, as the screen was in the middle of the handheld. From Shin's perspective, it was somewhat similar to the early handheld Sega Game Gear, but although the design was kind of similar to the PSP, it was still inferior to the PSP design, and there wasn't even an analog stick. Shin then witnessed Nikko presenting their Suzuki handheld, and the crowd, mostly composed of video game fans, erupted in excitement. They noticed that the LCD of the handheld was colorful and had adjustable brightness, addressing concerns about visibility in the sun. Alongside the handheld, there were new video games from Suzuki featuring impressive graphics. Next, Shin's brothers, Shiko and Seiki, approached him and took seats at the same table. "What do you think?" Shiko asked Shin with a smile as Nikko Tabata continued showcasing their new handheld video game console named Game Man, reminiscent of Suzuki's previous product name Walkman. Shin looked at his two brothers and replied, "It's not bad." Shiko smiled faintly and remarked, "I knew you wouldn't be overly impressed." Shin was somewhat surprised by his elder brother's nonchalant response. Then he heard Shiko saying, "Just keep watching, little brother." Shin nodded while sipping his wine. Masayoshi-san, seated near Shin's table, looked thoughtfully at the three Suzuki brothers. After Suzuki introduced their handheld video game console, the launching event wasn't finished yet. Following the introduction of Game Man, Suzuki continued with their event, unveiling their latest DVD model. Nikko Tabata elaborated on the DVD model, emphasizing its capability to play high-quality films from original CDs. He then showcased the Suzuki new DVD with a CD featuring a Suzuki film. The crowd was pleasantly surprised by the DVD's good quality. Simultaneously, Suzuki introduced their latest television model, with the DVD seamlessly connected to it. Attendees observed that the TV displayed impressive color, and the sound quality was also admirable. The Japanese were equally serious about televisions. Every year, those who could afford it sought to replace their TV with the latest model on the market. However, there were still individuals who refused to part with their television, even if it was broken. Japanese ingenuity prevailed, and a method to instantly fix a TV spread throughout the population, vigorously chopping the television would miraculously and temporarily repair it. Meanwhile, Shin observed and thought, "It seems like the handheld wasn't Suzuki's main product, hey." Then, Shiko asked him, "What do you think of our new DVD? And our latest television is always ahead in the market." Shin looked at Shiko, and Seiki, his third brother, added, "Even if our latest TV or DVD doesn't sell well in our home market, it doesn't matter, since the USA, Europe and other countries in Asia will be willing to spend their hard-earned money on this television." Hearing his two brothers bragging, Shin understood the message they were trying to convey. After the introduction of the latest models of DVD and TV, it was the unveiling of the latest version of Discman. A portable CD player, a music staple, offering an alternative to cassettes and vinyl for on-the-go listening. As the product was introduced, the crowd, whether they were video game fans or not, felt compelled to buy it. After all, almost all of them had a Discman, but the new Discman introduced was much smaller compared to the first versions, easily held in one hand and probably comfortably fitting in a pocket. Chapter 323, Reminding Shin. After that introduction of the latest Discman, the launching event finally ended. It seems like the latest model of Discman was the true product that Suzuki Electronics wanted to show in this Tokyo big sight. Shin then heard his brothers bragged again. With Shiko saying, "Little brother, our new product, a portable music player, was also ahead of the market. It was much smaller compared to its previous versions. I'm sure many people in this world would be willing to spend a lot of money on that, right? Well, we also heard that well-known Steve Jobs is a fan of our music player products." Seiki smiled as he said, "Aren't our little brother know of Steve Jobs?" Shiko then exclaimed, and then said seemingly genuinely, "Little brother, I'll give you the latest Discman later as a gift, it's for you and your friend Jobs." Shin was silent for a few seconds before saying, "Then I'll thank you in advance, elder brother." Shiko nodded with a smile before patting Shin on the shoulder and back several times before he walked away with Seiki. Shin then saw Shiko and Seiki approaching rich and influential individuals, engaging in cheerful conversation with them. While Shin played along with his older brothers, he was aware of their intentions. He was quite certain that his brothers also knew that he knew. Their conveyed message to him was that they're not limited to video games and that video games are not as profitable as their other products. Suzuki Electronics could offer more than Kishan could. Shin understood that his brothers were trying to communicate this to him and make him aware of his limits. Today surprised Shin, he came expecting his brothers to brag about the latest Suzuki handheld video game console. While that was the case, Shin felt the need to thank his two brothers. They reminded Shin of certain things he was gradually becoming more arrogant as Kishan and its companies grew. Shin noticed his increasing overconfidence with the wealth Kishan was accumulating, especially evident in his continuous acquisition of stocks from Microsoft and Apple. Beyond video games, Shin was also reminded that the truly profitable products were not cars or toys, but rather, music. Indeed, many people in this world love music, and their love for music equals or even surpasses their love for video games. Of course, Shin knew there was still a difference, as music and video games belonged to two different categories. The popularity of music in 1996 surpassed that of video games. While there were about hundreds of millions of estimated players, there were billions of people who were fans of music, no doubt about it. Michael Jackson's songs alone were quite popular worldwide. In Shin's Kishan Entertainment, where there were singers and musicians, and where Shin composed music from his previous life, the songs sung by Kishan Entertainment singers were already quite popular in this world, frequently heard in places like restaurants and cafes. Although it had been years since Kishan Entertainment released those songs Shin plagiarized from his previous life, they remained popular today. Currently, Kishan Entertainment singers and musicians were creating their originals. While some became quite popular, they couldn't compare to the songs Shin had written. However, Shin's current focus wasn't on plagiarizing music, he was contemplating the profitability of music, thinking about the Apple iPod from his previous life. It ended the domination of CD music players in most electronics companies, especially in Japan. While Shin considered mobile phones, the technologies needed for the envisioned phones would take a considerable amount of time. However, it was different with the iPod. Currently, Apple and Steve Jobs hadn't thought of the iPod concept yet. Apple was deeply focused on researching their portable products, like the eMate. Among other releases, Apple had introduced ingenious products such as the Apple Newton Message Pad in 1993. It used early touchscreen technology and was compact enough to fit in a pocket. Unfortunately, it wasn't a significant success for Apple. Regarding the iPod, from Shin's memory, it utilized NAND flash memory. The small size and lightweight nature of NAND flash memory made it perfect for the sleek and portable design of the iPod. In fact, NAND flash memory would also be a crucial component for mobile phones, for example, the iPhone. Besides that, the iPod required software, which wouldn't be much of a problem for Kishan. While Kishan could have joint research with Apple, Shin needed to think more about it. Considering NAND flash memory, Samstar also possessed that technology, which could greatly assist Kishan in the research. The industrial design of the iPod was clear in Shin's mind. While Shin had the industrial design of the iPod in mind, it wasn't the only important aspect. There was also the user interface design, hardware design, internal components and layout, connectors and ports, and finally, the board layout, a complex process involving several iterations and revisions. After a thoughtful moment, Shin spoke with several individuals before leaving the place. He sat in the back of his car as the driver navigated the road. Shin then turned on his phone and contacted key people in Kishan Research, already preparing to research the iPod. After finishing the contacts, Shin looked out the car window, his eyes focused on the scenery as his mind churned with thoughts. With a chuckle, he muttered, "Discman, hey." He remembered the proud faces of his brothers as they bragged about Suzuki's latest products beyond the handheld video game console, particularly proud of Discman. Little did his brothers know, because of them, Kishan would be researching the iPod ahead of time. Chapter 324, GBA Game. In the Kishan Research Building, Shin was in the office of the Director of Research. The Director of Research was a chubby man with a mustache, and Shin is providing the explanation for the electronic product or iPod in his mind to the man. Shin also put down the design of the iPod in front of the director, although the design didn't really include the board layout and board design, but the outward design, such as buttons and the screen, and the size of the device and the hardware design, such as the headphone jack and other ports. Although there's not yet a board layout and board design, Shin wrote the electrical components required for the device to fully function. The chubby director seriously listened to his young boss and also took a look at the design of the iPod. The director was gradually fascinated as he heard the explanation from the young boss, and at the same time, he heard from his young boss that he wanted the research to fully explore it and produce a prototype of it. As for the funds, the director knew that the budget was never a problem for his boss or his company, Kishan. This is gonna revolutionize the technology of the media player. The director, Morishita Isamu, exclaimed. Although he usually flattered the young boss, Shinro Suzuki, most of the time when the young boss is in the Kishan research building, this time, he was really genuinely impressed by such an electronic product. Shin nodded and said, "The Game Boy Advance is already finished, and after its testing, it may already be ready for mass production, so the researchers will have more time now to research on this media player device." Morishita Isamu nodded and said with a flattering smile, "Researching such a device requires effort and time, but with the design and required electronic components provided by the boss, we'll be able to research the device more conveniently." Shin didn't really care about the flattery of the director and just nodded, then said, "Then do your best in researching this product. If we can finish researching it in a year or so, then we'll end the domination of other companies in media player technologies." Morishita Isamu just nodded flatteringly. If Kishan could indeed produce a media player device with the design the young boss had presented, then there's no doubt that Kishan would truly dominate the media player products of other electronics companies. Several Japanese electronic companies were actually profiting from the media player device or music player, and that's a CD music player, such as the Discman of Suzuki, Marathon of Tora, Marathon was the name of Tora CD player, and a few others. After Shin finished arranging for the research of the iPod at Kishan Research, he went to the Kishan Rules headquarters and entered his office. There, Shin did what he usually does as the chairman of a multi-billion-dollar company, monitoring performance and risk. This involves overseeing the financial performance of the company and its subsidiaries, identifying and mitigating potential risks, and also ensuring ethical conduct, such as upholding the company's ethical standards and corporate social responsibility policies, advocating for the company's interests, and more. After that, Shin took a break and retrieved the Game Boy Advance from his pocket. His Game Boy Advance was custom designed, with the famous Kishan IPS from video games or animes painted on both the bottom and top shells. Then, he inserted a game cartridge without the designed cover. Shin turned on the Game Boy Advance, and the screen lit up with vibrant colors. The logo of Game Boy Advance and Kishan appeared before finally revealing the video game title. Golden Sun trademark appeared, and afterward, Shin could choose whether to name his character or not. There was an in-game default name, but Shin inputted his name, Shin, for the character and then selected OK. After that, the video game finally started with an exclamation text calling Shin, the in-game character's name, and the scene changed to a bed with another character. Shin quietly observed the performance of the Game Boy Advance so far, and, quite noticeably, from the beginning, he saw no problems. Instead, he felt like he was playing a Game Boy Advance SP in his previous life. The video game cartridge that he inserted into the Game Boy Advance was one of his favorite games from his previous life, Golden Sunday. Shin recalled being a high school student when he played that Game Boy Advance video game in his previous life. He remembered being deeply engrossed in playing the RPG game. Golden Sun for Game Boy Advance was actually one of the reasons why Shin decided to work in the video game industry after finishing university. To pursue this career path, Shin in his previous life chose a course that would help him secure a job in the video game industry. Despite his parents' objections, Shin chose to be independent at that time. Math, Shin's name in his previous life, and his parents had different ideals. Math wanted to become a game developer, but his parents wanted him to become an engineer. This was because his family, including his father and siblings, were engineers with majors in different categories. Well, his family in his previous life was somewhat fixated on the engineering profession. This was mainly because his father was Indian, and his mother was Southeast Asian. They believed that only by becoming an engineer could their children achieve success in life. Thinking about it brought a smile to Shin's face. He remembered in his previous life working in a few companies before becoming an independent video game developer in 2014. Despite receiving support from gamers for his video game, it wasn't enough to sustain his living. As a result, he applied for positions in companies. Well, the Game Boy Advance is functioning quite well. I guess it's about time the company needs to expedite the process of putting it into mass production as soon as possible, Shin muttered as he closed the Game Boy Advance. After that, he checked his watch and saw that it was already 5 p.m. He went home, and the moment he stepped into the living room, he saw his son, Shinichi, watching Pokemon. The moment the boy saw him, Shinichi immediately went to hug him. When Shin surprised the boy with the Game Boy Advance, Shinichi jumped in happiness. Upon seeing Shin giving their son a Game Boy Advance, Myra reprimanded Shin for spoiling the boy. However, Shin just coaxed Myra with a subtle gesture. Well, that's probably enough. Shin needs privacy. Chapter 325, Game Boy Advance. Around the mid of April, the Tora also released their own handheld video game console. The handheld video game console of Suzuki was just released in Japan for a week, and it didn't really bring a boost in sales. Then Tora was the same, although the sales were decent, it was not crazily selling. In fact, the products that were selling crazily for them was their CD music player. Then after a month of the release of the handheld video game console of Tora and Suzuki, Kishan just surprised Tokyo by releasing a handheld video game console. The two companies' competitors were taken by surprise, as the handheld video game console, the Game Boy Advance, was the handheld that became quickly popular the moment the Japanese saw it in the advertisement. The sleek design of Game Boy Advance, and also the flippable design of the top shell, and can be flipped to the bottom shell, the Japanese gamers immediately became extremely captivated. The advertisement of Game Boy Advance started with elementary boys and girls showing off their handheld video game console with each other, and the handheld video game console that seemed to be in the hands of each of the competing kids seemed to come from Tora and Suzuki. And then suddenly, a boy that's been looked down upon by the class suddenly took out something, and that is the Game Boy Advance. The moment the class saw the Game Boy Advance and its sleek design, and flippable design, they went from disdain for the boy to be captivated by the boy's handheld, and those that looked down on the boy were further embarrassed in the class. After seeing the Game Boy Advance, the boys and girls that were competing for who's the best handheld video game console became quite silent and immediately hid it in embarrassment. The advertisement of the Game Boy Advance was shown around on television, and many kids immediately wanted their parents to buy the Game Boy Advance for them. Upon the release of the Game Boy Advance in stores and malls around Tokyo, it quickly became a hit. The Game Boy Advance even almost caught up with the sales of the CD music player in its first week, despite the fact that its price was actually $199. That's right, the Game Boy Advance was more expensive than the handhelds from Tora or Suzuki, but many Japanese gamers still bought it. Kishan set this price due to the high-quality electrical components in the Game Boy Advance at this time of year 1996. Despite the cost, Kishan was making a substantial profit per sale. Kishan had invested heavily in research for the handheld, and to justify the high price, they highlighted the thin, flippable design, and most importantly, the impressive performance. The early games that accompanied the Game Boy Advance included Golden Sun, Super Mario Bros. 3, Remastered Game of Chess, and Fire Emblem. Gamers didn't hesitate to buy the two latest games, Fire Emblem and Golden Sunday. Although there were essentially only two new video games, according to Kishan's manual, the Game Boy Advance could also play game cartridges from the old Game Boy. Of course, not all were compatible, but the new Pokemon game released recently in March was actually compatible with the Game Boy Advance, making it convenient for many gamers who already owned Game Boy cartridges. And within just 2 weeks since the release of the Game Boy Advance, the overall estimated sales reached 170,000 units. This amounted to at least an estimated $33,830,000 in sales, approximately 4 billion yen, and that doesn't even include the recent sales of Game Boy game cartridges. It was a significant success for Kishan, while the handhelds from Tora and Suzuki were once again being ignored. In Pokemon Cafe in Tokyo, a young man named Raito was engrossed in playing Golden Sun on his newly bought Game Boy Advance, with his friends watching him play in envy. One of Raito's friends exclaimed, "Damn, man! I also wanted a Game Boy Advance, but my parents said they couldn't afford it." It was another young man named Tsubasa. "That's true. If I had one, I'd freaking love to show off such a handheld. I can flip it in style, you know." Another young man with dyed blonde hair remarked. Raito, upon hearing that, smiled. Some of the young people who had a Game Boy Advance were showing off by flipping their devices in front of friends or classmates. Gradually, the act of flipping the Game Boy seemed to become another kind of fashion among the youth. Then Raito said, "You guys shouldn't force your parents to buy you a Game Boy Advance, you know. I can just lend you mine once in a while." It actually took a while for it to run low on battery, about 4 or so hours before the battery became low. After Tsubasa and the other two young men heard that, they felt Raito was bragging. Tsubasa ignored Raito's faint bragging as he said, "My father just bought a Suzuki Discman, you know. And it's priced at about 30,200 yen. 30,200 yen equals $250. The dyed young man also sighed and said, "Yeah, my mom just bought the latest Louis Vuitton bag, and she refused to spend her money on the Game Boy Advance." The other young man with spiky hair nodded, saying, "That's true. I don't understand why women would be so obsessed with meaningless bags. It's much more expensive, yet it can't do as many functions as a Game Boy Advance." Tsubasa and the other two sighed in depression. When Raito saw this, he let them play on his Game Boy Advance for half an hour each, with the game Golden Sun where they could make yes or no decisions. With the RPG gameplay, the dissatisfied young men cheered up a little while playing the game, but they still wished they had one of their own. Chapter 326, Promised Game. In Kishan Rule's headquarters, Shin, in his office, examined the Game Boy Advance sales report. A slight smile crossed his face as he observed the sales growth in the first 2 weeks. However, the subsequent sales showed a minor decline, settling into a stable pattern. Simultaneously, regarding Game Boy Advance games like Golden Sun and Fire Emblem, Shin had made substantial changes compared to his previous life. Take Golden Sun, for instance. Although the gameplay and graphics remained similar, the content expanded significantly. Choices like yes or no now had a genuine impact on the storyline, introducing more depth to the player's experience. In his previous life, the Golden Sun options of yes or no were merely present, devoid of any influence on plot twists or narrative changes. Shin altered this dynamic, ensuring that these choices affected the story, introducing branching dialogues and side quests. He refined turn-based combat, introducing new Jin combinations, abilities, enemy types, enhancing strategic depth, and adding variety to combat encounters. While Kishin's Game Boy Advance hardware was slightly inferior to the Game Boy Advance SP from his previous life, the graphics demands of Golden Sun didn't strain Kishin's Game Boy Advance. Through optimization, Kishin enhanced the capabilities of his Game Boy Advance, making it achievable. Meanwhile, Shin recalled a promise to his 94-year-old grandfather of video game experience ahead of others. Before the Game Boy Advance release, Shin gifted his grandfather a Game Boy Advance along with 3 accompanying video games. Despite being in his 90s, the old man exhibited remarkable vitality, resisting the effects of time. Shin attributed his grandfather's robust health to a healthy lifestyle, balanced nutrition, and a fondness for playing video games, particularly RPGs. Regular gaming contributed to the old man's sharp memory. Coupled with daily exercise and discipline, the elderly gamer appeared as if he were still in his 70s. Shin attributed the old man Sazuma's robust health to his wealth, ensuring daily check UPS and a healthier lifestyle than some with unhealthy habits. However, despite his physical well-being, Sazuma's vitality still reflected his age. Projecting another decade of health was impressive for an elderly person, yet enduring beyond that suggested it wasn't quite the old man's time. With a wry chuckle, Shin noted that Sazuma feared death more than anyone, with Sazuma believing there'd be no video games or entertainment in the afterlife. After contemplating this, Shin picked up the Game Boy Advance game cartridge that had just completed testing. Originally intended for Kishin's classic colored Game Boy, Shin decided to adapt it for the Game Boy Advance, enhancing visuals. While there would still be a cartridge version for the classic colored Game Boy, playable on the Game Boy Advance, it would differ, featuring inferior visuals and less content compared to the dedicated Game Boy Advance cartridge version. The video game that Shin chose for Sazuma to play firsthand was named Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney. Shin deliberately selected this game to aid the old man's memory, given its critical and problem-solving gameplay. Each case in the game presents a complex puzzle with contradictions and hidden clues, requiring players to analyze evidence, draw logical conclusions, and identify inconsistencies, exercising critical thinking and problem-solving abilities. While Old Man Sazuma incorporates meditation into his routine for a better memory and enjoys playing RPG games, engaging in the video game Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney will undoubtedly bring a refreshing feeling to his mind, offering additional positive benefits. Variety is crucial. If a person consistently follows the same routine daily, the brain becomes accustomed to it, diminishing the cognitive benefits it can provide. Inside a traditional Japanese mansion belonging to Sazama, he immersed himself in a Game Boy Advance game, currently enjoying the tactical gameplay of Fire Emblem. So far, Sazama found satisfaction in the video games Golden Sun and Fire Emblem, yet he eagerly awaited the promised game from his grandson. Kumiko, holding a baby, glanced at Sazama and teased, "You old man. Can't you spare some attention for your great-grandson?" Sazama looked up, meeting Kumiko's gaze, and replied, "I already gave him my attention earlier. Do you honestly expect a baby to grasp that nonsense kenjutsu?" Kumiko exclaimed. "Where's his father, Shuaki? Why is he leaving us to care for his baby? We're old and already graduated from babysitting with our own children," Sazama retorted. "Come on, don't be like that. The baby is your great-grandson. Sigh. Fine, let him watch me play a video game. You're really hopeless." During their discussion, a butler from Sazama's household approached him, holding a phone. Sazama briefly glanced at the butler, who then conveyed that his youngest grandson was on the line. With joy, Sazama accepted the phone, and Shin, his grandson, shared the exciting news that the video game he had promised was now completed in production, and he would personally deliver it to Sazama. Chapter 327, Familiar Face. Shin arrived at the Sazama residence with his sleek and luxurious black car. Shin and Myra, with Shinichi, occasionally visit Sazama and Kumiko, sometimes once a week, or once a month. It depends on their schedules. Shin and Myra, along with their son Shinichi, continue their visits with their grandparents. Myra's grandfather has already passed away, but her grandmother is still there. So, once in a while, along with her parents, she meets with them, accompanied by Shinichi. Although Shin occasionally accompanies her, there are times he can't be with her on her family visits. The moment the guard at the Sazama residence saw Shin, Myra, and Shinichi, they immediately bowed and opened the gate for them. Afterwards, Shin's car gradually entered the Sazama residence through the gate. Afterwards, Shin, Myra, with Shinichi, walked out of the car. They were led by the servant inside the mansion. There, in the hall, Sazama and Kumiko welcomed them. The hall was simply decorated, yet it had a peaceful and calm atmosphere. But in the hall, there were already people, such as Shuaki, along with a foreign red-haired woman and a baby. The moment Shin, Myra, with their son Shinichi, entered the hall, it attracted the attention of Shuaki, the red-haired woman, and the baby, who were sitting around a low-slung table. Shuaki, upon seeing Shin, furrowed his brows for a second before returning to his normal expression. He didn't expect Shinro to be coming here. Moreover, his grandparents just mentioned they were waiting for someone, and he didn't expect it to be Shinro and his wife, especially with their son. Shuaki then noticed his grandfather and grandmother playing with Shinichi, completely captivated by their grandson's cute appearance. Seeing this, Shuaki felt solemn. From the looks of it, Shinichi still seems to be their favorite great-grandson. Shin, accompanied by Myra, approached the table where Shuaki and the foreign red-haired woman were sitting. The moment Shin saw the red-haired woman, he felt a sense of familiarity, as if he had seen her before, but it was just a fleeting moment. Dismissing it, he assumed she resembled someone from his memory. He focused on Shuaki and warmly greeted, "Cousin, how are you?" Shuaki attempted a smile, feeling a bit uneasy, especially smiling genuinely in front of someone his parents often compared him to. He replied with a smile, "I'm doing just fine." Shin nodded and placed the paper bag he was carrying on the wide yet low-slung table. He then took out a wine box from the bag. Meanwhile, the red-haired woman beside Shuaki observed Shin with curiosity. Suddenly, a realization struck her, and she thought in astonishment, "Isn't he the one who sang that heartfelt song in the bar a few years ago?" Indeed, she was the same red-haired woman who had approached Shin that day, only to be ignored. Later, Shin sang a song captured by a camera, which gained popularity after media coverage a few days later. Michelle Adams, the red-haired woman, didn't expect the man who left a great impression on her years ago to be her cousin-in-law. Shuaki and Michelle noticed the wine box that Shin had just taken out from the paper bag, realizing it was a luxury brand. It was Chateau Lafite Rothschild. Shuaki wasn't too surprised about Shin bringing such an expensive wine. After all, Shin could be considered a billionaire, although Shuaki wasn't entirely clear. He estimated Shin's worth to be at least around $800 million to $1 billion. Shuaki was hesitant to believe that Shin was a multi-billionaire, considering that while Shin's company had a net worth in the billions, Shoaki knew it was unlikely for Shin to solely own Kishan. He was almost certain that there must be several investors, even if it was a private company. Otherwise, how could Kishan expand and grow so rapidly? As Shin opened the wine box, he glanced at Shoaki and then at the red-haired woman carrying a baby. Shin inquired, "Who is this lady, cousin?" Upon hearing this, the red-haired woman felt a bit uneasy, concerned that Shin might have recognized her, but she reassured herself. After all, it had been a few years since their last encounter. Shoaki smiled and introduced Shin, saying, "This is my wife, Michelle Adams from the USA. She's going to be a Suzuki once we get married." He placed his hand on Michelle's waist as he spoke. Afterward, he also shared his baby's name with Shin and introduced Shin to Michelle. In turn, Shin introduced Myra to Michelle, and Myra simply nodded in acknowledgement. Upon learning that Shin was the Shinro Suzuki frequently mentioned in the USA, Michelle was a bit astonished. As she examined Shin more closely, she suddenly recalled seeing him on the cover of Forbes magazine. It appears that the memory in the bar was still an unforgettable moment for Michelle, as she initially recalled that instead of the Forbes cover. "Hello. Nice to meet you," Michelle smiled warmly as she greeted Shin. At the same time, she felt a bit relieved to see that Shin didn't seem to remember her at all. Shin nodded, and afterward, the servants brought cups. Shin poured some wine into the cups and offered them to Shoaki and Michelle. Myra got along well with Michelle, engaging in conversation. Michelle conversed lightly with Myra in rough Japanese. While Shin and Shoaki conversed lightly, Shoaki didn't openly express his dislike for Shin, despite occasional comparisons by his parents. Shoaki talked with him normally. During their conversation, Shoaki praised Kishan for the success of Game Boy Advance. Deep inside, he felt jealousy, but simultaneously, he knew he would be given a position in one of the companies under the Suzuki Group, lessening his envy. As Shin and others discussed, Sazuma and Kumiko's grandsons bonded well. Sazuma approached his grandsons and then looked expectantly at Shin. Shin smiled, understanding what the old man wanted, and handed him the game cartridge of Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney. Shoaki looked curiously at the cartridge given by Shin to the old man but didn't pay it much attention. Video games were not really his interest, after all. Chapter 328, Ace Attorney. Sazuma felt happy as he held the cartridge, and at the same time, he talked with Shin and Myra, asking if they're doing well, and so on. Meanwhile, Kumiko was still playing with the young Shinichi. The old woman seemed quite happy playing with Shinichi, who was running around the hall, with Kumiko chasing after him. The sound of Shinichi's cute laughter and Kumiko's old voice seemingly playfully scaring Shinichi filled the air as he ran away from the old woman. After a few days since Shin visited Sazuma's residence, the video game Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney was released for Game Boy Advance. Few Japanese gamers didn't really think much after buying the video game, they just casually bought it when they saw it as the latest Game Boy Advance game in the posters of video game stores. From the looks of the poster's advertisement, the video game seemed to be about a lawyer, as indicated in the name of the video game. Currently, in Japan, lawyer novels and dramas were popular genres alongside detective novels. Japanese readers developed a preference for books with a mystery element, influenced by the popular detective book called Sherlock Holmes. That's why Japanese people who recently bought a Game Boy Advance and occasionally read books bought the video game Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney. According to the posters displayed in video game stores, the video game seemed to be in the visual novel genre, a new and refreshing term that obviously attracted the attention of Japanese readers who occasionally read. Although the video game was produced by Kishan, it didn't garner much attention from most gamers. Even being from Kishan, gamers wouldn't buy it if it didn't align with their preferences. The genre being a new term didn't excite them, but when they read the example of the so-called new genre on the poster, stating focuses on a strong narrative, comparable to a book or TV show, but with interactive elements, those who preferred controlling game characters in action immediately lost interest. Only a minority with the means to afford it showed interest. Tamaki Masayuki, one of the few gamers able to try Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, purchased it and sat at a nearby cafe, inserting the video game cartridge into his Game Boy Advance. This portability aspect of the Game Boy Advance was what Masayuki truly appreciated. He could play anywhere and anytime, as long as there was enough battery in his Game Boy Advance. When Masayuki opened the flippable Game Boy Advance, it attracted attention from a few people in the cafe. Especially a young man with his girlfriend. The young man turned his eyes to Masayuki's Game Boy Advance, causing a frown from his girlfriend. She asked, "What's the matter?" The young man, momentarily captivated by the beauty of the Game Boy Advance, replied, "Nothing, nothing." He had momentarily forgotten he was with his girlfriend. She redirected her attention to where her boyfriend had been looking, only to see a man sitting alone holding something. When she realized it was a man, she shot a strange look at her boyfriend. Upon noticing his girlfriend's peculiar gaze, the young man innocently asked, "What?" Unaware that his girlfriend harbored suspicions about his true identity, he remained clueless. Meanwhile, Masayuki, oblivious to the fact that he had sparked suspicion in a young woman about her boyfriend, focused on the Game Boy Advance's bright and colorful screen. After the familiar introduction of Game Boy Advance and Kishan, the title and menu of Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney loaded up, and Masayuki began the game by selecting New Game. As the music played, scenes of red scarlet liquid flowing and dropping in black background cutscenes unfolded. On the text box below, text rolled out. Gasp! Gasp! Then the camera gradually rose upwards, revealing a miniature statue adorned with red scarlet liquid on top, to be precise, on the head of the thinker miniature statue. It was cradled by a hand wearing a black glove. Afterward, the scene transitioned to a young woman lying on the floor, blood flowing from her head. From these scenes alone, Masayuki deduced that the red liquid from the miniature statue was blood. The camera shook as text below in the text box rolled out, "Damn it! Why me?" Subsequently, the screen turned to a black background, with the text box continuing to roll out, "I can't get caught. Not like this." The scene shifted, and the camera precisely captured the woman lying down, with a maroon-suited man standing nearby. The camera gradually rose upwards, revealing the face of the killer. Accompanied by intense music of a stick lightly hitting the cymbal and light beats, the killer still clutched the thinker statue. Panic was evident on his face as text on the box rolled out, I've gotta find someone else to pin this on." The scene transitioned with the camera up close to the middle-aged man against a black background. As the camera flashed closer to the man's face, a gunshot sound accompanied the sinister expression on the middle-aged man's face, now bearing a vicious smile. The text box rolled out, "Someone like him." The scene flashed to the middle-aged man seemingly observing another person's back, then returned to his sinister expression and vicious smile. The text on the box continued to roll out, "I'll make it look like he did it." As Masayuki watched the cut scenes, he felt increasingly intrigued. He wondered how the gameplay would unfold. Chapter 329, Visual Novel Gameplay. The video game continues, and Masayuki saw the scene changed to the background, where there were seemingly two police on each side of the grand doorway. Then, the text on the text box below rolled out. At the top left corner of the text box was the name of the character talking, and it was the character Phoenix, the main character or in-game character of the video game. A female character named Mia talked to Phoenix. Next, Butts, a brown-haired man with a beard, appeared. The guy looked kind of immature, and soon, Masayuki saw that he was actually the main character's friend. Butts appeared to be the man being accused of murder. Masayuki assumed that the first cut scenes of the video game showed a middle-aged man seemingly killing a woman with the thinker miniature statue. As the text rolled out on the text box, Phoenix seemed to be thinking, "The newspapers say it was you." Beside the music soundtrack detention center of the game, there's a piano sound hinting something after the text "U" in red color rolled out. Masayuki took note of this. Unaware, a man wearing a top hat and a long coat entered the cafe. The man also wore black gloves and seemed to take notice of Masayuki playing something on that popular handheld Game Boy Advance. The man curiously looked over just behind Masayuki. Masayuki was deeply immersed in the video game, and the unsettling scene unfolded with a woman lying on the floor, her head in a pool of her own blood. Butts entered, and Phoenix appeared to be evaluating his friend. Analyzing their long-standing friendship since high school, Phoenix concluded that his friend was merely unlucky and had a good heart. Following that, the date in green text rolled out in the text box, and the scene transitioned to a bald man with an impressive beard, the judge. As the bald old man spoke, a label judge appeared, similar to where characters' names are inputted. The old bald judge conversed with Phoenix, and as the scene flashed back and forth, it became clear that Phoenix was quite nervous, as it was his first case to handle. Phoenix seemed somewhat unreliable, even forgetting the victim's name. Characters like Mia, positioned beside Phoenix, provided instructions about the game mechanics, such as the evidence and court record, where players could view evidence and profiles of people involved in the case. It was evident that the character and the video game were guiding gamers through the experience. The character Butts had a cute appearance but displayed anger issues. Despite this, he seemed eager to be sent to prison with his careless remarks and easily misunderstood words. The prosecutor and the judge appeared to be in agreement, painting a challenging situation for Phoenix. However, Masayuki found the character of Butts quite amusing. That Larry was kind of dumb, wasn't he? While engrossed in the video game, Masayuki suddenly heard a voice behind him. Pausing the game, he turned to see a formally dressed, gentlemanly-looking man. Noticing Masayuki's gaze, the man smiled and said, "Go on, go on. Just play the game. Don't mind me." Though slightly frowning, Masayuki didn't mind someone watching. It's not like he was reading an adult magazine, so he allowed the man to observe him playing on the Game Boy Advance. As the video game continued, the prosecutor called upon a witness. Upon seeing the witness, Masayuki exclaimed, "It was the real killer." Momentarily forgetting the man watching beside him, Masayuki was asked, "Oh? You already know who the killer is before the trial in this game?" Though a bit surprised by the man's engagement, he nodded and replied, "That's right. There's a cutscene showing that guy is the one who killed the victim." The man nodded and remarked, "Won't the game be boring, then? Since the player already knows the suspect, it won't come as a surprise. What does the game have to offer to make it entertaining?" Masayuki simply looked at the man and replied, "I don't know. If the player is just reading the storyline without any exciting elements, won't it be quite boring?" The man mused, stroking his chin. "Let's see," Masayuki said. Shortly after, as the witness appeared in court, Masayuki and the man's doubts about the game would soon be answered. The witness testimony began, accompanied by a fast-paced soundtrack. The scene flashed back to where the witness claimed to have seen the suspect running away from the crime scene, then returned to the witness. It alternated with scenes of the middle-aged man entering the crime scene as the text rolled out in the text box. The dynamic combination of the fast-paced soundtrack and the witness's testimony captured the attention and interest of both Masayuki and the man beside him. Then, Masayuki couldn't help but analyze the witness testimony. When the text rolled out with the words in red text "cross-examination" in the text box, the man was a bit surprised. "You can actually cross-examine in the game?" The man beside Masayuki was intrigued. "Yes, it seems we can contradict the witness testimony with evidence we have in the evidence." Masayuki nodded and said. "Interesting." The man nodded and added, "But this game may be quite too easy for me since I'm a lawyer after all." "You're a lawyer?" Masayuki appeared surprised. Seeing the man nod, Masayuki said, "Well, it may indeed look easy for you, as this is just the beginning of the game, after all." "Beginning, hey?" The man felt interested in playing the game. As he watched Masayuki play and cross-examine the case, he wanted to provide assistance, but the case seemed to be quite easy as Masayuki played the game quite well. When the scene with a man shouting the word in the comic action bubble "objection," accompanied by a dramatic sound effect appeared, Masayuki and the man were amused. The thrill Masayuki currently feels from gradually solving the case and uncovering the suspect's lies somehow brought a satisfying feeling. Additionally, the dramatic sound effect of a man shouting the word in the comic action bubble like "objection" or "hold it" is gratifying to hear, especially if the one uttering "objection" or "hold it" is the player and not the prosecutor. While Masayuki played, the middle-aged man remained adamant, refusing to admit guilt. He continued to find excuses and even changed his testimony to cover up the holes in his earlier statements. "Haha, that guy seems tough." The man beside Masayuki chuckled softly as he watched the game. Masayuki nodded, and simultaneously, the reaction animation of the witness and the prosecutor added a humorous touch. Even the witness, the middle-aged man, had his hair jumping every time Phoenix noticed a lie or contradiction in his testimony. Until the middle-aged man couldn't bear it anymore, not caring that his bald head was exposed to everybody. He lost his temper and continued pushing the blame onto Butts. Following that, the sounds of people in the court seemingly discussing echoed, and Phoenix appeared more confident as he witnessed the witness losing his cool. "It seems the suspect is about to lose." The man watching adjusted his top hat. As he observed the gameplay, he couldn't help but want to buy a Game Boy Advance and the game. Stroking his chin, the man thought, "Maybe it's a suitable game for my son." The man continued watching Masayuki play for a few more minutes until Phoenix finally proved that the witness, the middle-aged man, was the killer, and the case concluded. Observing this, the man said to Masayuki, "I have to admit, the game was kind of interesting." Masayuki smiled and replied, "Really? Just interesting? I felt like I was already addicted to the game. Check out my new novel Tycoon Actor in Hollywood. It already has a few chapters. Do tell what you think." So, Tycoon Actor in Hollywood might sound like a blockbuster about a guy swimming in money, but trust me, our protagonist is more like a tycoon in training. Not as loaded as this novel protagonist, video game magnate, definitely not as greedy, just a guy navigating Hollywood's glitz. It's all about character growth and the wild projects he tackles, whether it's his own indie masterpiece or a big screen spectacle. Time will spill the Hollywood beans in the future chapters. Chapter 330, Frustration. Masayuki isn't the only one who was gradually becoming addicted to the video game Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, as there are hundreds of gamers in Tokyo alone that are becoming quite addicted to the video game, playing it for hours. The visual novel game Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney can actually be completed in about 15 to 20 hours, but that is if the players were able to figure things out much easier and find clues more easily. However, most gamers actually need to repeat the witness testimony to see any clues or contradicting testimonies. It really tests the player's logic and deduction skills. At first, the gamers playing Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney felt the visual novel game to be quite easy. Still, as the player progressed in the visual novel game, they found the game to become increasingly difficult. Because of the difficulty, some gamers went to contact their other gamer friends for help, and most of those friends of theirs that didn't really buy the visual novel game Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney were also introduced to the game. With that, the visual novel game spreads by word of mouth. And with that, as the days passed since the visual novel game Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney was released, the sales slowly and gradually rose. Many of the gamers found out that, although the genre Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney was the unfamiliar sounding term called visual novel adventure, and the seemingly boring reading of the storyline and interactive elements was actually enjoyable for the players. In the Japanese forum of the Kishan website, there was a section dedicated to discussions about the visual novel game Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney. In the Kishan Japanese forum. Mujiwara no Luffy, damn it. I'm stuck in this episode Turnabout Samurai. I'm already in the final court session, and I don't see any problems with testimonies. What should I do? Mybulma_00 Mujiwara no Luffy, I'm facing the same situation. Can someone please help us? Meowth98 Mybulma_00, we can't help you two stupid players unless you describe the testimonies. And don't even ask me, I'm not at that level yet. Mybulma_00 Meowth98, then why do you even comment like you know something? No one's asking you. And calling us stupid was uncalled for, Bakayero. Paris girls Mujiwara no Luffy, my suggestion is that you read every press statement and analyze more carefully, only then will you find your ways. Games is the future Mujiwara no Luffy, I have the same suggestions as the user above, but I'll add. Dozens of such discussions about the visual novel game Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney can be found on the Kishan forum website. They revolve around players seeking help or discussing challenging episodes of Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, particularly the last few episodes of the visual novel game. Furthermore, the visual novel game Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney received high recommendations from various video game magazines. Several video game critics even reviewed the first episode of the visual novel game, and within just the initial episode, many critics expressed their admiration for it. These video game critics have been active since 1991, initially with Shonen Jump releasing issues featuring video game reviews by enthusiasts. Over the years, the community of video game critics has steadily grown, wielding significant influence in the Japanese video games industry. Some entertainment companies even provide substantial financial support to influential video game critics for positive reviews. While a few critics may accept bribes from other companies, when it comes to Kishan video games, almost every critic in Japan tends to praise them. There are only a few instances where Kishan games received either an average or negative review. With Kishan introducing a new game in an unfamiliar genre, visual novel adventure, many video game critics attempted to evaluate it. Subsequently, they concluded that, aside from some drawbacks, the game is undeniably enjoyable and can captivate gamers for extended periods. Gradually, an increasing number of gamers delved into the captivating yet unfamiliar genre introduced by Kishan, known as the visual novel game. Even though Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney stood as the sole representative in this uncharted genre, gamers experiencing the game within this unique style were optimistic about its future. Numerous video game entertainment companies that evaluated the visual novel game Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney drew inspiration from Kishan's approach to video game creation. During the Tora Suzuki conference meeting, Taro Ikeda, holding a Game Boy Advance, exclaimed, "How can a company exhibit such creativity in video game development? Besides exploring other business sectors, they're now essentially adding another dimension to entertainment in the video games industry. They blend a novel into a game, infusing drama, mystery, and thrills. Their new handheld is the real deal. It boasts a design embraced by many people. Furthermore, its performance slightly surpasses our current latest handheld," a Suzuki executive stated. Indeed, and the new genre that Kishan just introduced. They blended novel elements, story interaction in the game. Why didn't I think of it before? Idori Tanaka nodded solemnly. What I don't like is that Kishan can casually introduce a new genre, and it always becomes popular with people. I always wonder why we can't do the same, Seiki said with a sigh. It's not easy. Kenji Tanaka smiled wryly as he shrugged. I'll be honest with you all, the alliance between Suzuki and Tora in the video game sector didn't bear any fruit at all. Shiko said with a bit of mockery. When the executives heard this, they were somewhat surprised by how blunt Shiko Suzuki was. We joined the alliance with the goal to overcome Kishan, but so far, we are still considerably behind. Aren't the two corporations' alliance pretty useless? Shiko said with a frown. Then he added, do you all know how embarrassing it is for two giant companies to join forces to defeat a small worm? Yet, not only can't we beat and overcome the small worm, but we are being overcome by the small worm. No. The small worm seems to not even care about our alliance at all. Upon hearing this, the executives of the two giant companies couldn't help but fall silent. Idori Tanaka, having heard this, also kind of agreed with what Shiko Suzuki had said, so he nodded and said, indeed, I agree with you. Idori Tanaka's words also surprised the executives. They expected Idori Tanaka from Tora to be quite angry at Shiko Suzuki, but not only did he not get angry, he even agreed with Shiko Suzuki. That's why we must propose a proposition to each of our company's boards to increase the budget for our video game sector, so we will have more flexibility in dealing with our competitor, Idori Tanaka said seriously.
Thanks for listening.